Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 3, Chapter 11, The Bribe. If Creature could escape a lake full of Inferi, Harry was confident that the capture of Mundungus would only take a few hours at most, and he prowled the house all morning in a state of high anticipation. However, Creature did not return that morning, or even that afternoon. By nightfall, Harry felt discouraged and anxious, and a supper composed largely of mouldy bread, upon which Hermione had tried a variety of unsuccessful transfigurations, did nothing to help. Creature did not return the following day, nor the day after that. However, 2 cloaked men had appeared in the square outside number 12, and they remained there into the night, gazing in the direction of the house that they could not see. "Death Eaters for sure," said Ron, as he, Harry and Hermione watched from the drawing room windows. "Reckon they know we're in here?" "I don't think so," said Hermione, though she looked frightened. "Or they'd have sent Snape in after us, wouldn't they?" "Do you reckon he's been in here and had his tongue tied by Moody's curse?" asked Ron. "Yes," said Hermione. "Otherwise he'd be able to tell that lot how to get in, wouldn't he? But they're probably watching to see whether we turn up. They know that Harry owns the house, after all." "How do they—" began Harry. "Wizarding wheels are examined by the Ministry, remember? They'll know Sirius left you the place." The presence of the Death Eaters outside increased the ominous mood inside number 12. They had not heard a word from anyone beyond Grimmauld Place since Mr. Weasley's Patronus, and the strain was starting to tell. Restless and irritable, Ron had developed an annoying habit of playing with the deluminator in his pocket. This particularly infuriated Hermione, who was whittling away the weight for Creature by studying the tales of Beedle the Bard, and did not appreciate the way the lights kept flashing on and off. "Will you stop it?" she cried on the third evening of Creature's absence, as all the lights were sucked from the drawing room yet again. "Sorry," said Ron, clicking the deluminator and restoring the lights. "I don't know I'm doing it." "Well, can't you find something useful to occupy yourself?" "What, like reading kids' stories?" "Dumbledore left me this book, Ron, and he left me this deluminator. Maybe I'm supposed to use it." Unable to stand the bickering, Harry slipped out of the room unnoticed by either of them. He headed downstairs towards the kitchen, which he kept visiting because he was sure that was where Creature was most likely to reappear. Halfway down the flight of stairs into the hall, however, he heard a tap on the front door. Then metallic clicks and the grinding of the chain. Every nerve in his body seemed to tauten. He pulled out his wand, moved into the shadows beside the decapitated elf heads, and waited. The door opened. He saw a glimpse of the lamplit square outside, and a cloaked figure edged into the hall and closed the door behind it. The intruder took a step forwards, and Moody's voice asked, "Severus Snape?" Then the dust figure rose from the end of the hall and rushed him, raising its dead hand. "It's not I who killed you, Albus," said a quiet voice. The jinx broke. The dust figure exploded again, and it was impossible to make out the newcomer through the dense grey cloud it left behind. Harry pointed his wand into the middle of it. "Don't move!" He had forgotten the portrait of Mrs. Black. At the sound of his yell, the curtains hiding her flew open, and she began to scream. "Mudbloods and filth dishonouring my house!" Ron and Hermione came crashing down the stairs behind Harry, wands pointing. Like keys, at the unknown man now standing with his arms raised in the hall below. "Hold your fire! It's me, Remus!" "Oh, thank goodness," said Hermione weakly, putting her wand at Mrs. Black instead. With a bang, the curtain swished shut again, and silence fell. Ron, too, lowered his wand, but Harry did not. "Show yourself," he called back. Lupin moved forwards into the lamplight, hands still held high in a gesture of surrender. "I am Remus John Lupin, werewolf, sometimes known as Moony, one of the 4 creators of the Marauders map, married to Nymphadora, usually known as Tonks. And I taught you how to produce a Patronus, Harry, which takes the form of a stag." "Oh, all right," said Harry, lowering his wand. "But I had to check, didn't I?" "Speaking as your ex-Defense of Dark Arts teacher, I quite agree that you had to check. Ron, Hermione, you shouldn't be quite so quick to lower your defences." They ran down the stairs towards him. Wrapped in a thick, black travelling cloak, he looked exhausted, but pleased to see them. No sign of Severus then? He asked. No, said Harry. What's going on? Is everyone okay? Yes, said Lupin, but we're all being watched. There are a couple of Death Eaters in the square outside. We know. I had to apparate very precisely onto the top step outside the front door to be sure that they would not see me. They can't know you're in here, or I'm sure they'd have more people out there. They're staking out everywhere that's got any connection with you, Harry. Let's go downstairs. There's a lot to tell you, and I want to know what happened after you left the burrow. They descended into the kitchen, where Hermione pointed her wand at the grate. A fire sprang up instantly. It gave the illusion of the coziness to the stark stone walls and glistened off the long wooden table. Lupin pulled a few butterbeers from beneath his travelling cloak, and they sat down. I'd have been here 3 days ago, but I needed to shake off the Death Eater tailing me, said Lupin. So you came straight here after the wedding? No, said Harry. Only after we ran into a couple of Death Eaters and a calf on Tottenham Court Road. Lupin slopped most of his butterbeer down his front. What? They explained what had happened. When they had finished, Lupin looked aghast. How did they find you so quickly? It's impossible to track anyone who apparates, unless you grab hold of them as they disappear. It doesn't seem likely they were strolling down Tottenham Court Road at that time, does it? Said Harry. We wondered, said Hermione tentatively, whether Harry could still have the trace on him. Impossible, said Lupin. Ron looked smug, and Harry felt hugely relieved. Apart from anything else, they'd know for sure that Harry was here. If he had still had the trace on him, wouldn't they? But I can't see how they could have tracked you in Tottenham Court Road. That's worrying. Really worrying. He looked disturbed. But as far as Harry was concerned, that question could wait. Tell us what happened after we left. We haven't heard a thing since Ron's dad told us the family was safe. Well, Kingsley saved us, said Lupin. Thanks to his warning, most of the wedding guests were able to disapparate before they arrived. Were they Death Eaters? Or ministry people? Interjected Hermione. A mixture. But to all intents and purposes, they're the same thing now, said Lupin. There are about a dozen of them, but he didn't know that you were there, Harry. Arthur heard a rumour that they tried to torture your whereabouts at a scrimmager before they killed him. If it's true, he didn't give you away. Harry looked at Ron and Hermione. Their expressions reflected the mingled shock and gratitude he felt. He had never liked Scrimmager much, but if what Lupin said was true, the man's final act had been to try to protect Harry. The Death Eaters searched the burrow from top to bottom, Lupin went on. They found the ghoul, but didn't want to get too close, and then they interrogated those of us who remained for hours. They were trying to get information on you, Harry, but, of course, nobody, apart from the Order, knew that you had been there. At the same time that they were smashing up the wedding, more Death Eaters were forcing their way into every Order-connected house in the country. No deaths, he added quickly, forestalling the question. But they were rough. They burned down Daedalus Diggle's house. But as you know, he wasn't there. And they used the Cruciatus curse on Tonks' family. Again, trying to find out where you went after you visited them. They're all right. Shaken, obviously, but otherwise okay. The Death Eaters got through all those protective charms, Harry asked, remembering how effective these had been the night he had crashed into Tonks' parents' garden. What you've got to realise, Harry, is that the Death Eaters have got the full might of the Ministry on their side now, said Lupin. They've got the power to perform brutal spells without fear of identification or arrest. They managed to penetrate every defensive spell we'd cast against them, and once inside, they were completely open about why they'd come. And are they bothering to give an excuse for torturing Harry's whereabouts out of people? Asked Hermione, an edge to her voice. Well, said Lupin. He hesitated, then pulled out a folded copy of the Daily Prophet. Here, he said, pushing it across the table to Harry. You'll know sooner or later anyway. That's their pretext for going after you. Harry smoothed out the paper. A huge photograph of his own face filled the front page. He read the headline over it. Wanted for questioning about the death of Albus Dumbledore. Ron and Hermione gave roars of outrage. But Harry said nothing. He pushed the newspaper away. He did not want to read any more. He knew what it would say. Nobody but those who'd been on the top of the tower when Dumbledore died knew who had really killed him. And, as Rita Skeeter had already told the Wizarding World. Harry had been running from the place moments after Dumbledore had fallen. "I'm sorry, Harry," Lupin said. "So Death Eaters have taken over the Daily Prophet too?" asked Hermione furiously. Lupin nodded. "But surely people realise what's going on." "The coup has been smoothed and virtually silent," said Lupin. "The official version of Scrimmage's murder is that he resigned. He's been replaced by Pinus Fignesi, who's under the Imperius curse." "Why didn't Voldemort declare himself Minister for Magic?" asked Ron. Lupin laughed. "He doesn't need to, Ron. Effectively, he is the Minister. But why should he sit behind a desk at the Ministry? His puppet, Fignesi, is taking care of everyday business, leaving Voldemort free to extend his power beyond the Ministry. Naturally, many people have deduced what has happened. There's been such a dramatic change in the Ministry's policy in the last few days, and many are whispering that Voldemort must be behind it. However, that is the point. They whisper. They daren't define each other, not knowing whom to trust. They are scared to speak out, in case their suspicions are true, and their families are targeted. Yes, Voldemort is playing a very clever game. Declaring himself might have provoked open rebellion. Remaining masked has created confusion, uncertainty, and fear. And this dramatic change in the Ministry's policy," said Harry, "involves warning the Wizarding World against me instead of Voldemort." "That's certainly part of it," said Lupin, "and it is a masterstroke. Now that Dumbledore is dead, you, the boy who lived, were sure to be the symbol and rallying point for any resistance to Voldemort. But by suggesting that you had a hand in the old hero's death, Voldemort has not only set a price upon your head, but sown doubt and fear amongst many who would have defended you. Meanwhile, the Ministry has started moving against Muggleborns." Lupin pointed at the Daily Prophet. "Look at page 2. Hermione turned the pages, with much the same expression of distaste she had worn when handling Secrets of the Darkest Art. "Muggleborn Register," she read aloud. "The Ministry of Magic is undertaking a survey of so-called Muggleborns, the better to understand how they came to possess magical secrets. Recent research undertaken by the Department of Mysteries reveals that magic can only be passed from person to person when wizards reproduce, where no proven wizarding ancestry exists. Therefore, the so-called Muggleborn is likely to have obtained magical power by theft or force. The Ministry is determined to root out such usurpers of magical power, and to this end has issued an invitation to every so-called Muggleborn to present themselves for interview by the newly appointed Muggleborn Registration Commission." "People won't let this happen," said Ron. "It is happening, Ron," said Lupin. "Muggleborns are being rounded up as we speak." "But how are they supposed to have stolen magic?" said Ron. "It's mental. If you could steal magic, there wouldn't be any squibs, would there?" "I know," said Lupin. "Nevertheless, unless you can prove that you have at least one close wizarding relative, you are now deemed to have obtained your magical power illegally, and must suffer punishment." Ron glanced at Hermione, then said, "What if purebloods and half-bloods swear a magical born's part of their family? I'll tell everyone Hermione's my cousin." Hermione covered Ron's hands with hers and squeezed it. "Thank you, Ron, but I couldn't let you." "You won't have a choice," said Ron fiercely, gripping her hand back. "I'll teach you my family tree, so you can answer questions on it." Hermione gave a shaky laugh. "Ron, as we're on the run with Harry Potter, the most wanted person in the country, I don't think it matters. If I was going back to school, it would be different. What's Voldemort planning for Hogwarts?" she asked Lupin. "Attendance is now compulsory for every young witch and wizard," he replied. "That was announced yesterday. It's a change, because it was never obligatory before. Of course, nearly every witch and wizard in Britain has been educated at Hogwarts, but their parents had the right to teach them at home, or send them abroad if they preferred. This way, Voldemort will have the whole wizarding population under his eye from a young age, and it's also another way of weeding out Muggleborns, because students must be given blood stars, meaning that they have been proven to the Ministry that they are wizards of descent, before they are allowed to attend." Harry felt sickened and angry. At this moment, excited 11-year-olds would be poring over stacks of newly purchased spellbooks, unaware that they would never see Hogwarts, perhaps never see their families again either. It's, he muttered, struggling to find words that did justice to the horror of these thoughts. But Lupin said quietly, "I know." Lupin hesitated. "I'll understand if you can't confirm this, Harry. But the Order is under the impression that Dumbledore left you a mission." "He did," Harry replied. "And Ron and Hermione are in on it, and they're coming with me. Can you confide in me what the mission is?" Harry looked into the prematurely lined face, framed in thick but greying hair, and wished that he could return a different answer. "I can't, Remus. I'm sorry. If Dumbledore didn't tell you, I don't think I can." "I thought you'd say that," said Lupin, looking disappointed. "But I might still be some use to you. You know what I am, and what I can do. I could come with you to provide protection. There would be no need to tell me exactly what you are up to." Harry hesitated. It was a very tempting offer, though how they would be able to keep their mission secret from Lupin, if he were with them all the time, he could not imagine. Hermione, however, looked puzzled. "But what about Tonks?" she asked. "What about her?" said Lupin. "Well," said Hermione, frowning, "you're married? How does she feel about you going away with us?" "Tonks will be perfectly safe," said Lupin. "She'll be at her parents' house." There was something strange in Lupin's tone. It was almost cold. There was also something odd in the idea of Tonks remaining hidden at her parents' house. She was, after all, a member of the Order, and, as far as Harry knew, was likely to want to be in the thick of the action. "Remus," said Hermione tentatively, "is everything all right? You know, between you and—" "Everything is fine, thank you," said Lupin pointedly. Hermione turned pink. There was another pause, an awkward and embarrassed one, and then Lupin said, with an air of forcing himself to admit something unpleasant, "Tonks is going to have a baby." "Oh, how wonderful!" squealed Hermione. "Excellent," said Ron enthusiastically. "Congratulations," said Harry. Lupin gave an artificial smile that was more like a grimace, then said, "So, do you accept my offer? Will 3 become 4? I cannot believe that Dumbledore would have disapproved. He appointed me your Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher after all, and I must tell you that I believe that we are facing magic many of us have never encountered or imagined." Ron and Hermione both looked at Harry. Just to be clear," he said, "you want to leave Tonks at her parents' house and come away with us?" "She'll be perfectly safe there. They'll look after her," said Lupin. He spoke with a finality bordering on indifference. "Harry, I'm sure James would have wanted me to stick with you." "Well," said Harry slowly, "I'm not. I'm pretty sure my father would have wanted to know why you weren't sticking with your own kid, actually." Lupin's face drained of colour. The temperature in the kitchen might have dropped 10 degrees. Ron stared around the room as though he had been bidden to memorize it, while Hermione's eyes swiveled backwards and forwards from Harry to Lupin. "You don't understand," said Lupin at last. "Explain then," said Harry. Lupin swallowed. I made a grave mistake in marrying Tonks. I did it against my better judgment, and I have regretted it very much ever since." "I see," said Harry. "So you're just going to dump her and the kid and run off with us?" Lupin sprang to his feet. His chair toppled over backwards, and he glared at them so fiercely that Harry saw, for the first time ever, the shadow of the wolf upon his human face. "Don't you understand what I've done to my wife and my unborn child? I should never have married her. I've made her an outcast." Lupin kicked aside the chair he had just overturned. "You've only ever seen me amongst the Order, or under Dumbledore's protection at Hogwarts. You don't know how most of the wizarding world sees creatures like me. When they know of my affliction, they can barely talk to me. Don't you see what I've done? Even our own family is disgusted by our marriage. What parents want their daughter to marry a werewolf? And the child. Lupin actually seized handfuls of his own hair. He looked quite deranged. "My kind don't usually breed. It will be like me. I'm convinced of it. How can I forgive myself when I knowingly risk passing on my own condition to an innocent child? And if, by some miracle, it is not like me, then it will be better off, 100 times so, without a father of whom it must always be ashamed." "Remus," whispered Hermione, tears in her eyes. "Don't say that. How could any child be ashamed of you?" "Oh, I don't know, Hermione," said Harry. "I'd be pretty ashamed of him." Harry did not know where his rage was coming from, but it propelled him to his feet too. Lupin looked as though Harry had hit him. "If the new regime thinks Muggleborns are bad," Harry said, "what will they do to half-werewolves whose fathers are in the Order? My father died trying to protect my mother and me, and you reckon he'd tell you to abandon your kid to go on an adventure with us? How dare you?" said Lupin. "This is not Sebastian's desire for danger or personal glory. How dare you suggest a—" "I think you're feeling a bit of a daredevil," Harry said. "You fancy stepping into Sirius's shoes." "Harry, no!" Hermione begged him, but he continued to glare into Lupin's livid face. "I'd never have believed this," Harry said. "The man who taught me to fight Dementors. A coward." Lupin drew his wand so fast that Harry had barely reached for his own. There was a loud bang, and he felt himself flying backwards as if punched. As he slammed into the kitchen wall and slid to the floor, he glimpsed the tail of Lupin's cloak disappearing around the door. "Remus! Remus, come back!" Hermione cried, but Lupin did not respond. A moment later, they heard the front door slam. "Harry!" wailed Hermione. "How could you?" "It was easy," said Harry. He stood up. He could feel a lump swelling where his head had hit the wall. He was still so full of anger, he was shaking. "Don't look at me like that," he snapped at Hermione. "Don't you start on her," snarled Ron. No, we mustn't fight," said Hermione, launching herself between them. "You shouldn't have said that stuff to Lupin," Ron told Harry. "He had it coming to him," said Harry. Broken images were racing each other through his mind. Sirius, falling through the veil. Dumbledore suspended, broken in midair. A flash of green light and his mother's voice, begging for mercy. "Parents," said Harry, "shouldn't leave their kids unless they've got to." "Harry," said Hermione, stretching out a consoling hand, but he shrugged it off and walked away, his eyes on the fire Hermione had conjured. He had once spoken to Lupin out of that fireplace, seeking reassurance about James, and Lupin had consoled him. Now Lupin's tortured, white face seemed to swim in the air before him. He felt a sickening surge of remorse. Neither Ron nor Hermione spoke, but Harry felt sure that they were looking at each other behind his back, communicating silently. He turned around and caught them turning hurriedly away from each other. "I know I shouldn't have called him a coward." "No, you shouldn't have," said Ron at once. "But he's acting like one." "All the same," said Hermione. "I know," said Harry. "But if it makes him go back to Tonks, it'll be worth it, won't it?" He could not keep the plea out of his voice. Hermione looked sympathetic, Ron uncertain. Harry looked down at his feet, thinking of his father. Would James have backed Harry in what he had said to Lupin? Or would he have been angry at how his son had treated his old friend? The silent kitchen seemed to hum with the shock of the recent scene, and with Ron and Hermione's unspoken reproaches. The Daily Prophet Lupin had brought was still lying on the table, Harry's own face staring up at the ceiling from the front page. He walked over to it and sat down, opened the paper at random, and pretended to read. He could not take in the words. His mind was still too full of the encounter with Lupin. He was sure that Ron and Hermione had resumed their silent communications on the other side of the Prophet. He turned the page loudly, and Dumbledore's name leapt out at him. It was a moment or two before he took in the meaning of the photograph, which showed a family group. Beneath the photograph were the words, "The Dumbledore family, left to right, Albus, Percival, holding newborn Ariana, Kendra, and Aberforth." His attention caught. Harry examined the picture more carefully. Dumbledore's father, Percival, was a good-looking man, with eyes that seemed to twinkle even in this faded old photograph. The baby, Ariana, was a little longer than a loaf of bread, and no more distinctive looking. The mother, Kendra, had jet black hair, pulled into a high bun. Her face had a carved quality about it. Despite the high-necked silk gown she wore, Harry thought of Native Americans as he studied her dark eyes, high cheekbones, and straight nose. Albus and Aberforth were wearing matching lacy coloured jackets and had identical shoulder-length hairstyles. Albus looked several years older, but otherwise, the two boys looked very alike, for this was before Albus's nose had been broken, and before he started wearing glasses. The family looked quite happy and normal, smiling serenely up out of the newspaper. Baby Ariana's arm waved vaguely out of her shawl. Harry looked above the picture and saw the headline, "Exclusive extract from the upcoming biography of Albus Dumbledore by Rita Skeeter," thinking that it could hardly make him feel any worse than he already did. Harry began to read. Proud and haughty, Kendra Dumbledore could not bear to remain in the mould on the wold after her husband Percival's well-publicised arrest and imprisonment in Azkaban. She therefore decided to uproot the family and relocate to Godric's Hollow, the village that was later to gain fame as the scene of Harry Potter's strange escape from you-know-who. Like mould on the wold, Godric's Hollow was home to a number of wizarding families, but as Kendra knew none of them, she would be spared the curiosity about her husband's crime she had to face in their former village. By repeatedly rebuffing the friendly advances of her new wizarding neighbours, she soon assured that her family was left well alone. "Slammed the door in my face when I was around to welcome her, with a batch of homemade cauldron cakes," said Bathilda Bagshot. "The first year they were there, I only ever saw the two boys. Wouldn't have known there was a daughter if I hadn't been picking Plicatines by the moonlight the winter after they moved in, and saw Kendra leading Ariana out into the back garden. Walked her around the lawn once, keeping firm grip on her, then took her back inside. Didn't know what to make of it. It seems that Kendra thought that the move to Godric's Hollow was the perfect opportunity to hide Ariana once and for all. Something she had probably been planning for years. The timing was significant. Ariana was barely 7 years old when she had vanished from sight, and 7 is the age by which most experts agree that magic would have revealed itself, if present. Nobody now alive remembers Ariana ever demonstrating even the slightest sign of magical ability. It seems clear, therefore, that Kendra made a decision to hide her daughter's existence rather than suffer the shame of admitting that she had produced a squib. Moving away from the friends and neighbours who knew Ariana would, of course, make imprisoning her all the easier. The tiny number of people who henceforth knew of Ariana's existence could be counted upon to keep the secret, including her 2 brothers, who deflected awkward questions with the answer their mother had taught them: "My sister is far too frail for school." Next week, Albus Dumbledore at Hogwarts, the prizes and the pretense. Harry had been wrong. What he had read indeed made him feel worse. He looked back at the photograph of the apparently happy family. Was it true? How could he find out? He wanted to go to Godric's Hollow, even if Bathilda was in no fit state to talk to him. He wanted to visit the place where he and Dumbledore had both lost loved ones. He was in the process of lowering the newspaper to ask Ron and Hermione's opinions when a deafening crack echoed around the kitchen. For the first time in 3 days, Harry had forgotten all about Creature. His immediate thought was that Lupin had burst back into the room, and for a split second, he did not take in the mass of struggling limbs that had appeared out of thin air right beside his chair. He hurried to his feet as Creature disentangled himself and, bowing low to Harry, croaked, "Creature has returned with the thief Mundungus Fletcher, master." Mundungus scrambled up and pulled out his wand. Hermione, however, was too quick for him. "Expelliarmus!" Mundungus' wand soared into the air, and Hermione caught it. Wild-eyed, Mundungus dived for the stairs. Ron rugby tackled him, and Mundungus hit the stone floor with a muffled crunch. "What?" he bellowed, rifling in his attempts to free himself from Ron's grip. "What have I done? Setting a bleeding house elf on me. What are you playing at? What have I done? Let me go, or—" "You're not in much of a position to make threats," said Harry. He threw aside the newspaper, crossed the kitchen in a few quick strides, and dropped to his knees beside Mundungus, who stopped struggling and looked terrified. Ron got up, panting, and watched as Harry pointed his wand deliberately at Mundungus's nose. Mundungus stank of stale sweat and tobacco smoke. His hair was matted, and his robes stained. "Creature apologizes for the delay in bringing the thief, master," croaked the elf. "Fletcher knows how to avoid capture. He has many hidey holes and accomplices. Nevertheless, Creature cornered the thief in the end." "You've done really well, Creature," said Harry, and the elf bowed low. "Right, we've got a few questions for you," Harry told Mundungus, who shouted at once, "I panicked, okay? I never wanted to come along. No offence, mate. but I never volunteered to die for you. And that was bleeding you-know-who came flying at me. Anyone would have got out of there. I said all along I didn't want to do it. For your information, none of the rest of us disapparated, said Hermione. Well, you're a bunch of bleeding heroes, aren't you? But I never pretended I was up for killing myself. We're not interested in why you ran out on Mad Eye, said Harry, moving his wand a little closer to Mundungus's baggy, bloodshot eyes. We already knew you were an unreliable bit of scum. Well then, why am I being hunted down by house elves? Or is this about them goblets again? I ain't got none of them left. Or you could have them. It's not about the goblets either. Although you're getting warmer, said Harry. Shut up and listen. It felt wonderful to have something to do. Someone of whom he could demand some small portion of truth. Harry's wand was now so close to the bridge of Mundungus's nose that Mundungus had gone cross-eyed, trying to keep it in view. When you cleaned out this house of anything valuable, Harry began, but Mundungus interrupted him again. Sirius never cared about any of the junk. There was a sound of pattering feet, a blaze of shining copper, an echoing clang, and a shriek of agony. Creature had taken a run at Mundungus and hit him over the head with a saucepan. Call him off! Call him off! Should lock him up! Screamed Mundungus, cowering as Creature raised the heavy bottom pan again. Creature, no! Shouted Harry. Creature's thin arms trembled with the weight of the pan, still held aloft. Perhaps just one more, Master Harry. For luck? Ron laughed. We need him conscious, Creature, but if he needs persuading, you can do the honours, said Harry. Thank you very much, Master, said Creature with a bow, and he retreated a short distance, his great, pale eyes still fixed upon Mundungus with loathing. When you stripped this house of any of the valuables you could find, Harry began again, you took a bunch of stuff from the kitchen cupboard. There was a locket there. Harry's mouth was suddenly dry. He could sense Ron and Hermione's tension, and excitement too. What did you do with it? Why? Asked Mundungus. Is it valuable? You've still got it, cried Hermione. No, he hasn't, said Ron shrewdly. He's wondering whether he should have got more money for it. More? Said Mundungus. That would have been effing difficult. Bleeding gave it away, didn't I? No choice. What do you mean? I was selling in Diagon Alley and she came up to me and asked if I'd got a license for trading in magical artifacts. Bleeding snoop. She was going to fine me. But she took a fancy to the locket and told me she'd take it and let me off that time and to think myself lucky. Who was this woman? Asked Harry. I don't know. Some ministry hag. Mundungus considered for a moment. Brow wrinkled. Little woman. Bow on the top of her head. He frowned and then added, Looked like a toad. Harry dropped his wand. It hit Mundungus on the nose and shot red sparks into his eyebrows, which ignited. Agamonte! Screamed Hermione, and a jet of water streamed from her wand, engulfing a spluttering and choking Mundungus. Harry looked up and saw his own shock reflected in Ron and Hermione's face. The scars on the back of his right hand seemed to be tingling again. Chapter 12. Magic is Might. As August wore on, the square of unkept grass in the middle of Grimmauld Place shriveled in the sun until it was brittle and brown. The inhabitants of number 12 were never seen by anybody in the surrounding houses, and nor was number 12 itself. The Muggles, who lived in Grimmauld Place, had long since accepted the amusing mistake in the numbering that had caused number 11 to sit beside number 13. And yet the square was now attracting a trickle of visitors who seemed to find the anomaly most intriguing. Barely a day passed without one or two people arriving in Grimmauld Place with no other purpose, or so it seemed, than to lean against the railings facing numbers 11 and 13, watching the join between the two houses. The lurkers were never the same 2 days running, although they seemed to share a dislike for normal clothing. Most of the Londoners who passed them were used to eccentric dresses and took little notice, though occasionally one of them might glance back, wondering why anyone would wear such long cloaks in this heat. The watchers seemed to be gleaning little satisfaction from their vigil. Occasionally, one of them started forwards excitedly, as if they had seen something interesting at last, only to fall back looking disappointed. On the first day of September, there were more people lurking in the square than ever before. Half a dozen men in long cloaks stood silent and watchful, gazing as ever at houses 11 and 13, but the thing for which they were waiting, still appeared elusive. As evening drew in, bringing with it an unexpected gust of chilly rain for the first time in weeks, there occurred one of these explicable moments when they appeared to have seen something interesting. The man with a twisted face pointed, and his closest companion, a podgy, pallid man, started forwards. But a moment later, they had relaxed into their previous state of inactivity, looking frustrated and disappointed. Meanwhile, inside number 12, Harry had just entered the hall. He nearly lost his balance as he apparated onto the top step just outside the front door, and thought that the Death Eaters might have caught a glimpse of his momentarily exposed elbow. Shutting the front door carefully behind him, he pulled off the invisibility cloak, draped it over his arm, and hurried along the gloomy hallway towards the door that led to the basement. A stolen copy of the Daily Prophet clutched in his hand. The usual low whisper of "Severus Snape" greeted him. The chill wind swept him, and his tongue rolled up for a moment. "I didn't kill you," he said, once it had unrolled. Then he held his breath as the dusty Jinx figure exploded. He waited until he was halfway down the stairs to the kitchen, out of earshot of Mrs. Black, and clear of the dust cloud before calling, "I've got news, and you won't like it." The kitchen was almost unrecognisable. Every surface now shone. Copper pots and pans had been burnished to a rosy glow. The wooden tabletop gleamed. The goblets and plates, already laid for dinner, glinted in the light from a merrily blazing fire, on which a cauldron was simmering. Nothing in the room, however, was more dramatically different than a house elf, who now came hurrying towards Harry, dressed in a snowy white towel, his ear hair as clean and fluffy as cotton wool, Regulus's locket bouncing on his thin chest. "Shoes off, if you please, Master Harry." "And hands washed before dinner," croaked Creature, seizing the invisibility cloak and slouching off to hang it on a hook on the wall, beside a number of old-fashioned robes that had been freshly laundered. "What's happened?" Ron asked apprehensively. He and Hermione had been poring over a sheaf of scribbled notes and hand-drawn maps that littered the end of the long kitchen table, but now they watched Harry as he strode towards them and threw down the newspaper on top of their scattered parchment. A large picture of a familiar hooked-nosed, black-haired man stared up at them all, beneath a headline that read, "Severus Snape, confirmed as Hogwarts headmaster." "No!" said Ron and Hermione loudly. Hermione was quickest. She snatched up the newspaper and began to read the accompanying story out loud. "Severus Snape, long-standing potions master at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, was today appointed headmaster in the most important of several staffing changes at the ancient school. Following the resignation of the previous Muggle Studies teacher, Electo Caro will now take over the post while her brother, Amicus, fills the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. I welcome the opportunity to uphold our finest wizarding traditions and values, like committing murder and cutting off people's ears, I suppose. Snape, headmaster! Snape in Dumbledore's study! Merlin's pants!" she shrieked, making both Harry and Ron jump. She leapt up from the table and hurtled from the room, shouting as she went, "I'll be back in a minute." "Merlin's pants," repeated Ron, looking amused. She must be upset. He pulled the newspaper towards him and perused the article about Snape. "The other teachers won't stand for this. McGonagall and Flitwick and Sprout all know the truth. They know how Dumbledore died. They won't accept Snape as headmaster. And who are these Carrows?" "Death Eaters," said Harry. "There are pictures of them inside. They were at the top of the tower when Snape killed Dumbledore. So it's all friends together and..." Harry went on bitterly, drawing up a chair. "I can't see that the other teachers have got any choice but to stay. If the Ministry and Voldemort are behind Snape, it'll be a choice between staying and teaching, or a nice few years in Azkaban, and that's if they're lucky. I reckon they'll stay to try and protect the students." Creature came bustling to the table, with a large tureen in his hands, and ladled out soup into pristine bowls, whistling between his teeth as he did so. "Thanks, Creature," said Harry, flipping over the prophet so as not to look at Snape's face. "Well, at least we know exactly where Snape is now." He began to spoon soup into his mouth. The quality of Creature's cooking had improved dramatically ever since he had been given Regulus's locket. Today's French onion was as good as Harry had ever tasted. "There are still a load of Death Eaters watching the house," he told Ron as he ate. "More than usual. It's like they're hoping we'll march out carrying our school trunks and head off for the Hogwarts Express." Ron glanced at his watch. I've been thinking about that all day. It left nearly 6 hours ago. Weird not being on it, isn't it? In his mind's eye, Harry seemed to see the scarlet steam engine, as he and Ron had once followed it by air, shimmering between fields and hills. A rippling scarlet caterpillar. He was sure Ginny, Neville and Luna were sitting together at this moment, perhaps wondering where he, Ron and Hermione were, or debating how best to undermine Snape's new regime. They nearly saw me coming back in just now, Harry said. I landed badly on the top step, and the cloak slipped. I do that every time. Oh, here she is, Ron added, craning around in his seat to watch Hermione re-enter in the kitchen. And what in the name of Merlin's most baggy Y-fronts was that about? I remembered this, Hermione panted. She was carrying a large, framed picture, which she now lowered to the floor, before seizing her small, beaded bag from the kitchen dresser. Opening it, she proceeded to force the painting inside, and despite the fact that it was patently too large to fit inside the tiny bag, within a few seconds, it had vanished, like so much else, into the bag's capacious depths. Phineas Nigellus, Hermione explained, as she threw the bag onto the kitchen table, with the usual sonorous, clanking crash. Sorry, said Ron. But Harry understood. The painted image of Phineas Nigellus Black was able to flint between his portrait in Grimmauld Place and the one that hung in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, a circular tower-top room where Snape was no doubt sitting right now, in triumphant possession of Dumbledore's collection of delicate, silver magical instruments, the stone pensieve, the sorting hat and, unless it had been moved elsewhere, the sword of Gryffindor. Snape could send Phineas Nigellus to look inside this house for him, Hermione explained to Ron, as she resumed her seat. But let him try it now. All Phineas Nigellus will be able to see is the inside of my handbag. Good thinking, said Ron, looking impressed. Thank you, smiled Hermione, pulling her soup towards her. So, Harry, what else happened today? Nothing, said Harry. Watched the ministry entrance for 7 hours. No sign of her. Saw your dad though, Ron. He looks fine. Ron nodded his appreciation of this news. They had agreed that it was far too dangerous to try to communicate with Mr. Weasley while he walked in and out of the ministry, because he was always surrounded by other ministry workers. It was, however, reassuring to catch these glimpses of him, even if he did look very strained and anxious. Dad always told us most ministry people use the flu network to get to work, Ron said. That's why we haven't seen Umbridge. She'd never walk. She thinks she's too important. And what about that funny old witch and that little wizard in the navy robes? Hermione asked. Oh yeah, the bloke from Magical Maintenance, said Ron. How do you know he works for Magical Maintenance? Hermione asked, her soup spoon suspended in midair. Dad said everyone from Magical Maintenance wears navy blue robes. But he never told us that. Hermione dropped her spoon and pulled towards her the sheaf of notes and maps that she and Ron had been examining when Harry had entered the kitchen. There's nothing in here about navy blue robes, nothing, she said, flipping feverishly through the pages. Well, does it really matter? Ron, it all matters. If we're going to get into the ministry and not give ourselves away, when they're bound to be on the lookout for intruders, every little detail matters. We've been over and over this, I mean. What's the point in all these reconnaissance trips if you aren't bothering to tell us? Blimey, Hermione, I forgot one little thing. You do realise, don't you, that there's probably no more dangerous places in the world for us to be right now than the ministry? I think we should do it tomorrow, said Harry. Hermione stopped dead, her jaw hanging. Ron choked a little over his soup. Tomorrow, repeated Hermione. You aren't serious, Harry. I am, said Harry. I don't think we're going to be much better prepared than we are now, even if we skulk about the ministry entrance for another month. The longer we put it off, the further away that locket could be. There's already a good chance Umbridge had chucked it away. The thing doesn't open. Unless, said Ron, she's found a way of opening it, and she's now possessed. Wouldn't make any difference to her. She was so evil in the first place, Harry shrugged. Hermione was biting her lip, deep in thought. We know everything important, Harry went on, addressing Hermione. We know they've stopped apparition in and out of the ministry. We know only the most senior minister members are allowed to connect their homes to the flu network now, because Ron heard those two unspeakables complaining about it. And we know roughly where Umbridge's office is, because of what you heard that bearded bloke say to his mate. I'll be up on level 1. Dolores wants to see me, Hermione recited immediately. Exactly, said Harry. And we know you get in using those funny coins, or tokens, or whatever they are, because I saw that witch borrowing one from a friend. But we haven't got any. If the plan works, we will have, Harry continued calmly. I don't know, Harry. I don't know. There are an awful lot of things that could go wrong. So much relies on chance. That'll be true even if we spend another 3 months preparing, said Harry. It's time to act. He could tell from Ron and Hermione's faces that they were scared. He was not particularly confident in himself. And yet he was sure that the time had come to put their plan into operation. They had spent the previous 4 weeks taking it in turns to don the invisibility cloak and spy on the official entrance to the ministry, which Ron, thanks to Mr. Weasley, had known since childhood. They had tailed ministry workers on their way in, eavesdropped on their conversations, and learned by careful observation which of them could be relied upon to appear, alone, at the same time every day. Occasionally, there had been a chance to sneak a daily profit out of somebody's briefcase. Slowly, they had built up the sketchy maps and notes, now stacked in front of Hermione. All right, said Ron slowly. Let's say we go for it tomorrow. I think it should just be me and Harry. Oh, don't start that again, sighed Hermione. I thought we'd settled this. It's one thing hanging around the entrances under the cloak, but this is different, Hermione. Ron jabbed a finger at the copy of the Daily Prophet, dated 10 days previously. You're on the list of Muggleborns who didn't present themselves for interrogation. And you're supposed to be dying of splattergroit at the Burrow. If anyone shouldn't go, it's Harry. He's got a 10,000 galleon price on his head. Fine, I'll stay here, said Harry. Let me know if you ever defeat Voldemort, won't you? As Ron and Hermione laughed, pain shot through the scar on Harry's forehead. His hand jumped to it. He saw Hermione's eyes narrow, and he tried to pass off the moment by brushing his hair out of his eyes. Well, if all 3 of us go, we'll have to disapparate separately, Ron was saying. We can't all fit under the cloak anymore. Harry's scar was becoming more and more painful. He stood up. At once, Creature hurried forwards. Master has not finished his soup. Would Master prefer the savoury stew? Or else the treacle tart to which Master is so partial? Thanks, Creature. But I'll be back in a minute. Bathroom. Aware that Hermione was watching him suspiciously, Harry hurried up the stairs to the hall, and then to the first landing, where he dashed into the bathroom and bolted the door again. Grunting with pain, he slumped over the black basin, with its taps in the form of open-mouthed serpents, and closed his eyes. He was gliding along a twilight street. The buildings on either side of him had high, timbered gables. They looked like gingerbread houses. He approached one of them, then saw the whiteness of his own long-fingered hand against the door. He knocked. He felt a mounting excitement. The door opened. A laughing woman stood there. Her face fell as she looked into Harry's face. Humour gone. Terror replacing it. Grigorovich, said a high, cold voice. She shook her head. She was trying to close the door. A white hand held it steady, prevented her shutting him out. I want Grigorovich. What? He nick me? She cried, shaking her head. He no live here. He no live here. I know him not. Abandoning the attempt to close the door, she began to back away down the dark hall, and Harry followed, gliding towards her, and his long-fingered hand drew to his wand. Where is he? Dash with each knack. He move. I know not. I know not. He raised the wand. She screamed. 2 young children came running into the hall. She tried to shield them with her arms. There was a flash of green light. Harry! Harry! He opened his eyes. He had sunk to the floor. Hermione was pounding on the door again. Harry, open up! He had shouted out. He knew it. He got up and unbolted the door. Hermione toppled inside at once, regained her balance, and looked around suspiciously. Ron was right behind her, looking unnerved as he pointed his wand into the corners of the chilly bathroom. What were you doing? Asked Hermione sternly. What do you think I was doing? Asked Harry, with feeble bravado. You were yelling your head off, said Ron. Oh yeah, I must have dozed off or... Harry, please don't insult our intelligence, said Hermione, taking deep breaths. We know your scar hurt downstairs, and you're wet as a sheet. Harry sat down on the edge of the bath. Fine. I've just seen Voldemort murdering a woman. By now he's probably killed her whole family, and he didn't need to. It was Cedric all over again. They were just there. Harry, you aren't supposed to let this happen anymore, Hermione cried, her voice echoing through the bathroom. Dumbledore wanted you to use occlumency. He thought the connection was dangerous. Voldemort can use it, Harry. What good is it to watch him kill and torture? How can it help? Because it means I know what he's doing, said Harry. So you're not going to try and shut him out? Hermione, I can't. You know I'm lousy at occlumency. I never got the hang of it. You never really tried, she said hotly. I don't get it, Harry. Do you like having this special connection or relationship or whatever it is? She faltered, under the look he gave her as he stood up. Like it, he said quietly. Would you like it? No. I'm sorry, Harry. I didn't mean... I hate it. I hate the fact that he can get inside me. That I have to watch him when he's most dangerous. But I'm going to use it. Dumbledore, forget Dumbledore. This is my choice. Nobody else's. I want to know why he's after Grigorovich. Who? He's a foreign wand maker, said Harry. He made Crumb's wand, and Crumb reckons he's brilliant. But according to you, said Ron, Voldemort's got Ollivander locked up somewhere. If he's already got a wand maker, what does he need another one for? Maybe he agrees with Crumb. Maybe he thinks Grigorovich is better. Or else he thinks Grigorovich will be able to explain what my wand did when he was chasing me, because Ollivander didn't know. Harry glanced into the cracked, dusty mirror and saw Ron and Hermione exchanging skeptical looks behind his back. Harry, you keep talking about what your wand did, said Hermione, but you made it happen. Why are you so determined not to take responsibility for your own power? Because I know it wasn't me. And so does Voldemort, Hermione. We both know what really happened. They glared at each other. Harry knew that he had not convinced Hermione, and that she was marshalling counter-arguments against both his theory on his wand, and the fact that he was permitting himself to see into Voldemort's mind. To his relief, Ron intervened. Drop it, he advised her. It's up to him, and if we're going to the Ministry tomorrow, don't you reckon we should go over the plan? Reluctantly, as the other two could tell, Hermione let the matter rest, though Harry was quite sure she would attack him again at the first opportunity. In the meantime, they returned to the basement kitchen, where Creature served them all stew and treacle tart. They did not get to bed until late that night, after spending hours going over and over their plan, until they could recite it word perfect to each other. Harry, who was now sleeping in Sirius's room, lay in bed with his one light, trained on the old photograph of his father, Sirius, Lupin and Pettigrew, and muttered the plan to himself for another 10 minutes. As he extinguished his wand, however, he was thinking not of Polyjuice Potion, puking pastels, or the navy blue robes of magical maintenance. He thought of Grigorovich, the wand maker, and how long he could hope to remain hidden while Voldemort sought him so determinedly. Dawn seemed to follow midnight with indecent haste. You look terrible, was Ron's greeting, as he entered his room to wake Harry. Not for long, said Harry, yawning. They found Hermione downstairs in the kitchen. She was being served coffee and hot rolls by Creature, and wearing the slightly manic expression that Harry associated with exam revision. Robes, she said under her breath, acknowledging their presence with a nervous nod, and continued to poke around in her beaded bag. Polyjuice Potion, invisibility cloak, decoy detonators. You should each take a couple just in case. Pukin pastels, nosebleed nougat, extendable ears. They gulped down their breakfast, then set off upstairs, Creature bowing them out, and promising to have a steak and kidney pie ready for them when they returned. Bless him, said Ron fondly. And when you think I used to fantasize about cutting off his head and sticking it up the wall. They made their way out onto the front step with immense caution. They could see a couple of puffy-eyed Death Eaters watching the house from across the misty square. Hermione disapparated with Ron first, then came back for Harry. After the usual brief spell of darkness and near suffocation, Harry found himself in the tiny alleyway where the first phase of their plan was scheduled to take place. It was as yet deserted, except for a couple of large bins. The first Ministry workers did not usually appear here until at least 8 o'clock. Right then, said Hermione, checking her watch. She ought to be here in about 5 minutes. When I've stunned her... Hermione, we know, said Ron sternly. And I thought we were supposed to open the front door before she got here. Hermione squealed. I nearly forgot. Stand back. She pointed her wand at the padlocked and heavily graffitied fire door beside her, which burst open with a crash. The dark corridor behind it led, as they knew from their careful scouting trips, into an empty theatre. Hermione pulled the door back towards her, to make it look as though it was still closed. And now, she said, turning back to face the other two in the alleyway. We put on the cloak again. And we wait, Ron finished, throwing it over Hermione's head, like bays over a budgerigar, and rolling his eyes at Harry. Little more than a minute later, there was a tiny pop, and a little ministry witch with fly-away, grey hair apparated feet from them. Blinking a little in the sudden brightness, the sun had just come out from behind a cloud. She barely had time to enjoy the unexpected warmth, however, before Hermione's silent stunning spell hit her in the chest, and she toppled over. "Nicely done, Hermione," said Ron, emerging from behind a bin beside the theatre door as Harry took off the invisibility cloak. Together, they carried the little witch into a dark passageway that led backstage. Hermione plucked a few of her hairs from the witch's head and added them to a flask of muddy polyjuice potion she had taken from the beaded bag. Ron was rummaging through the little witch's handbag. "She's Mafalda Hopkirk," he said, reading a small card that identified their victim as an assistant to the improper use of magic office. "You better take this, Hermione, and here are the tokens." He passed her several small golden coins, all embossed with the letters MOM, which he had taken from the witch's purse. Hermione drank the polyjuice potion, which was now a pleasant heliotrope colour, and within seconds stood before them, the double of Mafalda Hopkirk, and she removed Mafalda's spectacles and put them on. Harry checked his watch. "We're running late. Mr. Magical Maintenance will be here any second." They hurried to close the door on the real Mafalda. Harry and Ron threw the invisibility cloak over themselves, but Hermione remained in view, waiting. Seconds later, there was another pop, and a small, ferrety-looking wizard appeared before them. "Oh, hello, Mafalda." "Hello," said Hermione in a quavery voice. "How are you today?" "Not so good, actually," replied the little wizard, who looked thoroughly downcast. As Hermione and the wizard headed for the main road, Harry and Ron crept along behind them. "I'm sorry to hear you're under the weather," said Hermione, talking firmly over the little wizard as he tried to expound upon his problems. It was essential to stop him reaching the street. "Here, have a sweet. Oh, no thanks." "I insist," said Hermione aggressively, shaking the bag of pastels in his face. Looking rather alarmed, the little wizard took one. The effect was instantaneous. The moment the pastel touched his tongue, the little wizard started vomiting so hard that he did not even notice as Hermione yanked a handful of his hairs from the top of his head. "Oh dear," she said, as he splattered the alleyway with sick. "Perhaps you'd better take the day off." No, he choked and retched, trying to continue on his way despite being unable to walk straight. "I must, today, must go." "But that's just silly," said Hermione, alarmed. "You can't go to work in this state. I think you ought to go to St. Mungo's and get them to sort you out straight away." The wizard had collapsed, heaving, on all fours, still trying to crawl towards the main street. "You simply can't go to work like this," cried Hermione. At last, he seemed to accept the truth of her words. Using a repulsed Hermione to claw his way back into a standing position, he turned on the spot and vanished, leaving nothing behind but the bag Ron had snatched from his hand as he went, and some flying chunks of vomit. "Ugh," said Hermione, holding up the skirts of her robes to avoid the puddles of sick. "It would have been much less of a mess to stun him too." "Yeah," said Ron, emerging from under the cloak holding the wizard's bag. "But I still think the whole pile of unconscious bodies would have drawn more attention. Keen on his job though, isn't he? Chuck us the hair in the potion then." Within 2 minutes, Ron stood before them, as small and ferrety as the sick wizard, and wearing the navy blue robes that had been folded in his bag. Weird he wasn't wearing them today, wasn't it? Seeing how much he wanted to go. Anyway, I'm Red Catamole, according to the label in the back. "Now wait here," Hermione told Harry, who was still under the invisibility cloak, "and we'll be back with some hairs for you." He had to wait 10 minutes, but it seemed much longer to Harry. Skulking alone in the sick-splattered alleyway, beside the door concealing the stunned Mafalda, finally, Ron and Hermione reappeared. "We don't know who he is," Hermione said, passing Harry several curly, black hairs. "But he's gone home with a dreadful nosebleed. Here, he's pretty tall. You'll need bigger robes." She pulled out a set of old robes Creature had laundered for them, and Harry retired to take the potion and change. Once the painful transformation was complete, he was more than 6 feet tall, and from what he could tell from his well-muscled arms, powerfully built. He also had a beard. Stowing the invisibility cloak and his glasses inside his new robes, he rejoined the other two. Blimey, that's scary, said Ron, looking up at Harry, who now towered over him. Take one of Mafalda's tokens, Hermione told Harry, and let's go. It's nearly 9. They stepped out of the alleyway together, 50 yards along the crowded pavement. There were spiked black railings flanking 2 flights of steps, one labelled gentlemen, the other ladies. See you in a moment then, said Hermione nervously, and she tottered off down the steps to the ladies. Harry and Ron joined a number of oddly dressed men descending into what appeared to be an ordinary underground public toilet, tiled in grimy black and white. Morning, Reg, called another wizard in navy blue robes, as he let himself into a cubicle by inserting the golden token into a slot in the door. Bloomin' pain in the bum this, eh? Forcing us all to get to work this way. Who are they expecting to turn up, Harry Potter? The wizard roared with laughter at his own wit. Ron gave a forced chuckle. Yeah, he said. Stupid, isn't it? And he and Harry let themselves into adjoining cubicles. To Harry's left and right came the sound of flushing. He crouched down, peered through the gap at the bottom of the cubicle, just in time to see a pair of booted feet climbing into the toilet next door. He looked left and saw Ron blinking at him. We have to flush ourselves in, he whispered. Looks like it, Harry whispered back. His voice came out deep and gravelly. They both stood up, feeling exceptionally foolish. Harry clambered into the toilet. He knew at once that he had done the right thing. Though he appeared to be standing in water, his shoes, feet and robes remained quite dry. He reached up, pulled the chain, and next moment had zoomed down a short chute, emerging out of a fireplace into the Ministry of Magic. He got up clumsily. There was a lot more of his body than he was accustomed to. The great atrium seemed darker than Harry remembered it. Previously, a golden fountain had filled the centre of the hall, casting shimmering spots of light over the polished wooden floor and walls. Now, a gigantic statue of black stone dominated the scene. It was rather frightening. This vast sculpture of a witch and a wizard sitting on an ornately carved throne. Looking down at the ministry workers, toppling out of fireplaces below them, engraved in foot-high letters at the base of the statue were the words, Magic is might. Harry received a heavy blow to the back of the legs. Another wizard had just flown out of the fireplace behind him. Out of the way, can't you? Oh, sorry, Runcorn. Clearly frightened, the balding wizard hurried away. Apparently, the man whom Harry was impersonating, Runcorn, was intimidating. Psst, said a voice. He looked around to see a wispy little witch and the ferrety wizard from magical maintenance gesturing to him from over beside the statue. Harry hastened to join them. You got in all right then? Hermione whispered to Harry. No, he's still stuck in the bog, said Ron. Oh, very funny. It's horrible, isn't it? She said to Harry, who was staring up at the statue. Have you seen what they're sitting on? Harry looked more closely and realised that what he had thought were decoratively carved thrones were actually mounds of carved humans, hundreds and hundreds of naked bodies, men, women and children, all with rather stupid, ugly faces, twisted and pressed together to support the weight of the handsomely robed wizards. Muggles, whispered Hermione, in their rightful place. Come on, let's get going. They joined the stream of witches and wizards, moving towards the golden gates at the end of the hall, looking around as surreptitiously as possible. But there was no sign of the distinctive figure of Dolores Umbridge. They passed through the gates and into a smaller hall, where queues were forming in front of 20 golden grills, housing as many lifts. They had barely joined the nearest one when a voice said, Catamole! They looked around. Harry's stomach turned over. One of the Death Eaters, who had witnessed Dumbledore's death, was striding towards them. The ministry workers beside them fell silent, their eyes downcast. Harry could feel fear rippling through them. The man's scowling, slightly brutish face was somehow at odds with his magnificent, sweeping robes, which were embroidered with much gold thread. Someone in the crowd around the lifts called sycophantically, Morning, Yaxley! Yaxley ignored them. I requested somebody from magical maintenance to sort out my office, Catamole. It's still raining in there. Ron looked around, as though hoping someone else would intervene, but nobody spoke. Raining? In your office? That's not good, is it? Ron gave a nervous laugh. Yaxley's eyes widened. You think it's funny, Catamole, do you? A pair of witches broke away from the queue from the lift and bustled off. No, said Ron. No, of course. You realise that I am on my way downstairs to interrogate your wife, Catamole. In fact, I'm quite surprised you're not down there holding her hand while she waits. Already given her up as a bad job, have you? Probably wise. Be sure and marry a pureblood next time. Hermione had let out a little squeak of horror. Yaxley looked at her. She coughed feebly and turned away. I, stammered Ron. But if my wife were accused of being a mudblood, said Yaxley. Not that any woman I married would ever be mistaken for such filth. And the head of Department of Magical Law Enforcement needed a job doing, I would make it my priority to do that job, Catamole. Do you understand me? Yes, whispered Ron. Then attend to it, Catamole. And if my office is not completely dry within an hour, your wife's blood status will be in even graver doubt than it is now. The golden grille before them clattered open. With a nod and unpleasant smile to Harry, who was evidently expected to appreciate this treatment of Catamole, Yaxley swept away towards another lift. Harry, Ron and Hermione entered theirs, but nobody followed them. It was as if they were infectious. The grille shut with a clang, and a lift began to move upwards. What am I going to do? Ron asked the other two at once. He looked stricken. If I don't turn up, Catamole's wife. We'll come with you. We should stick together, began Harry. But Ron shook his head feverishly. That's mental. We haven't got much time. You two find Umbridge. I'll go and sort out Yaxley's office. But how do I stop it raining? Try finite incantatum, said Hermione at once. That should stop the rain, if it's a hex or curse. If it doesn't, something's gone wrong with the atmospheric charm, which will be more difficult to fix. So as an interim measure, try impervious, to protect his belongings. Say it again slowly, said Ron, searching his pockets desperately for a quill. But at that moment, the lift jutted to a halt. A disembodied female voice said, Level 4, Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, incorporating Beast, Being, and Spirit Divisions, Goblin Liaison Office, and Pest Advisory Bureau. And the grille stood open again, emitting a couple of wizards and several pale violet paper aeroplanes that fluttered around the lamp in the ceiling on the lift. Morning, Albert, said a bushly whiskered man, smiling at Harry. He glanced over at Ron and Hermione as the lift creaked upwards once more. Hermione was now whispering frantic instructions to Ron. The wizard leaned towards Harry, leering and muttered, Dirk Cresswell, eh? From Goblin Liaison? Nice one, Albert. I'm pretty confident I'll get his job now. He winked. Harry smiled back, hoping that this would suffice. The lift stopped. The grilles opened once more. Level 2, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, including the improper use of Magic Office, Aura Headquarters, and Wizard Gamut Administration Services, said the disembodied voice. Harry saw Hermione give Ron a little push, and he hurried out of the lift, followed by the other wizards, leaving Harry and Hermione alone. The moment the golden door had closed, Hermione said very fast, Actually, Harry, I think I'd better go after him. I don't think he knows what he's doing, and if he gets caught, the whole thing... Level 1, Minister for Magic and Support Staff. The golden grille stood open again, and Hermione gasped. 4 people stood before them, 2 of them deep in conversation. A long-haired wizard, wearing magnificent robes of black and gold, and a squat, toad-like witch, wearing a velvet bow in her short hair and clutching a clipboard to her chest. Chapter 13. The Muggle-Born Registration Commission. Ah, Mathilda, said Umbridge, looking at Hermione. Travers sent you, did he? Yes, squeaked Hermione. Good. You'll do perfectly well. Umbridge spoke to the wizard in black and gold. That's that problem solved, Minister. If Mafalda can be spared for record keeping, we shall be able to start straight away. She consulted her clipboard. 10 people today, and one of them the wife of a ministry employee. Tut tut. Even here, in the heart of the ministry. She stepped into the lift beside Hermione, as did the 2 wizards, who had been listening to Umbridge's conversation with the minister. We'll go straight down, Mafalda. You'll find everything you need in the courtroom. Good morning. Albert, are you getting out? Yes, of course, said Harry in Runcorn's deep voice. Harry stepped out of the lift. The golden grills clanged shut behind him. Glancing over his shoulder, Harry saw Hermione's anxious face sinking back out of sight. A tall wizard on either side of her, Umbridge's velvet hairbow level with her shoulder. What brings you up here, Runcorn? Asked the new Minister for Magic. His long, black hair and beard were streaked with silver, and a great overhanging forehead shadowed his glinting eyes, putting Harry in mind of a crab, looking out from beneath a rock. Needed a quick word with... Harry hesitated for a fraction of a second. Arthur Weasley. Someone said he was up on level 1. Ah, said Pierce Vignesi. Has he been caught having contact with the undesirable? No, said Harry, his throat dry. No, nothing like that. Ah, well, it's only a matter of time, said Vignesi. If you ask me, the blood traitors are as bad as the mudbloods. Good day, Runcorn. Good day, Minister. Harry watched Vignesi march away along the thickly carpeted corridor. The moment the Minister had passed out of sight, Harry tugged the invisibility cloak out from under his heavy, black cloak, threw it over himself, and set off along the corridor in the opposite direction. Runcorn was so tall that Harry was forced to stoop to make sure his big feet were hidden. Panic pulsed in the pit of his stomach as he passed gleaming wooden door after gleaming wooden door, each bearing a small plaque with the owner's name and occupation upon it. The might of the Ministry, its complexity, its impenetrability, seemed to force themselves upon him, so that the plan he had been carefully concocting with Ron and Hermione over the last 4 weeks seemed laughably childish. They had concentrated all their efforts on getting inside without being detected. They had not given a moment's thought to what they would do if they were forced to separate. Now Hermione was stuck in court proceedings, which would undoubtedly last hours. Ron was struggling to do magic that Harry was sure was beyond him, a woman's liberty possibly demanding on the outcome. And he, Harry, was wandering around on the top floor when he knew perfectly well that his quarry had just gone down in the lift. He stopped walking, leaned against the wall, and tried to decide what to do. The silence pressed upon him. There was no bustling or talk, or swift footsteps here. The purple carpeted corridors were as hushed as though the muffliato charm had been cast over the place. Her office must be up here, Harry thought. It seemed most unlikely that Umbridge would keep her jewellery in her office, but on the other hand, it seemed foolish not to search it to make sure. He therefore set along the corridor again, passing nobody but a frowning wizard, who was murmuring instructions to a quill that floated in front of him, scribbling on a trail of parchment. Now paying attention to the names on the doors, Harry turned a corner. Halfway along the next corridor, he emerged into a wide, open space, where a dozen witches and wizards sat in rows at small desks, not unlike school desks, though much more highly polished and free from graffiti. Harry paused to watch them, for the effect was quite mesmerizing. They were all waving and tweedling their wands in unison, and squares of coloured paper were flying in every direction like little pink kites. After a few seconds, Harry realised that there was a rhythm to the proceedings, that the papers all formed the same pattern, and after a few more seconds, he realised that he was watching the creation of pamphlets, that the paper squares were pages, which when assembled, folded, and magicked into place, fell into neat stacks beside each wizard and witch. Harry crept closer, although the workers were so intent on what they were doing that he doubted that they would notice a carpet-muffled footstep, and he slid a completed pamphlet from the pile beside a young witch. He examined it beneath the invisibility cloak. Its pink cover was emblazoned with a golden title, Mudbloods, and the dangers they pose to a peaceful pureblood society. Beneath the title was a picture of a red rose, with a simpering face in the middle of its petals, being strangled by a green weed with fangs and a scowl. There was no author's name upon the pamphlet, but again, the scars on the back of his right hand seemed to tingle as he examined it. Then the young witch beside him confirmed his suspicion as she said, still waving and twirling her wand, "Will the old hag be interrogating mudbloods all day? Does anyone know?" "Careful," said the wizard beside her, glancing around nervously. One of his pages slipped and fell to the floor. What? Has she got magic ears as well as an eye now? The witch glanced towards the shining mahogany door. Facing the space full of pamphlet makers, Harry looked too, and rage reared in him like a snake. Where there might have been a peephole on a muggle front door, a large, round eye with a bright blue iris had been set into the wood, an eye that was shockingly familiar to anybody who knew Alistair Moody. For a split second, Harry forgot where he was and what he was doing there. He even forgot that he was invisible. He strode straight over to the door to examine the eye. It was not moving. It gazed blindly upwards, frozen. The plaque beneath it read, Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Below that, a slightly shinier new plaque read, Head of the Muggle-Born Registration Commission. Harry looked back at the dozen pamphlet makers. Though they were intent upon their work, he could hardly suppose that they would not notice if the door of the empty office opened in front of them. He therefore withdrew from an inner pocket an odd object with little waving legs and a rubber-bulbed horn for a body. Crouching down beneath the cloak, he placed the decoy detonator on the ground. It scuttled away at once, through the legs of the witches and wizards in front of him. A few moments later, during which Harry waited with his hand upon the doorknob, there came a loud bang, and a great deal of acrid, black smoke billowed from a corner. The young witch in the front row shrieked. Pink pages flew everywhere as she and her fellows jumped up, looking around for the source of the commotion. Harry turned the doorknob, stepped into Umbridge's office, and closed the door behind him. He felt he had stepped back in time. The room was exactly like Umbridge's office at Hogwarts. Lace draperies, dollies, and dried flowers covered every available surface. The walls bore the same ornate plates, each featuring a highly coloured, beribboned kitten, gambolling and frisking with sickening cuteness. The desk was covered with a flouncy, flowered cloth. Behind Mad Eye's eye, a telescopic attachment enabled Umbridge to spy on the workers on the other side of the door. Harry took a look through it and saw that they were all still gathered around the decoy detonator. He wrenched the telescope out of the door, leaving a hole behind, pulled the magical eyeball out of it, and placed it in his pocket. Then he turned to face the room again, raised his wand, and murmured, Accio Locket. Nothing happened, but he had not expected it to. No doubt Umbridge knew all about protective charms and spells. He therefore hurried behind the desk and began pulling open the drawers. He saw quills and notebooks and speller tape, enchanted paper clips that coiled snake-like from their drawer, and had to be beaten back. A fussy little lace box full of spare hair bows and clips, but no sign of a locket. There was a filing cabinet behind the desk. Harry set to searching it. Like Filch's filing cabinets at Hogwarts, it was full of folders, each labelled with a name. It was not until Harry reached the bottommost drawer that he saw something to distract him from his search. Mr. Weasley's file. He pulled it out and opened it. Arthur Weasley. Blood status. Pure blood, but with unacceptable pro-muggle learnings. Known member of the Order of the Phoenix. Family. Wife. Pure blood. 7 children. 2 youngest at Hogwarts. NB. Youngest son currently at home. Seriously ill. Ministry inspectors have confirmed. Security status. Tracked. All movements are being monitored. Strong likelihood undesirable number 1 will contact. Has stayed with the Weasley family previously. Undesirable number 1? Harry muttered under his breath as he replaced Mr. Weasley's folder and shut the drawer. He had an idea. He knew who that was. And sure enough, as he straightened up and glanced around the office for fresh hiding places, he saw a poster of himself on the wall with the words, Undesirable number 1, emblazoned across his chest. A little pink note was stuck to it, with a picture of a kitten in the corner. Harry moved across to read it, and saw that Umbridge had written, To be punished. Angrier than ever, he proceeded to grope into the bottoms of the vases and baskets of dried flowers, but was not at all surprised that the locket was not there. He gave the office one last sweeping look, and his heart skipped a beat. Dumbledore was staring back at him from a small, rectangular mirror, propped up on a bookcase beside the desk. Harry crossed the room at a run and snatched it up, but realised the moment he touched it that it was not a mirror at all. Dumbledore was smiling wistfully out of the front cover of a glossy book. Harry had not immediately noticed the curly, green writing across his hat, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, nor the slightly smaller writing across his chest, by Rita Skeeter, best-selling author of Amado Dippet, Master or Moron. Harry opened the book at random and saw a full-page photograph of two teenage boys, both laughing immoderately, with their arms around each other's shoulders. Dumbledore, now with elbow-length hair, had grown a tiny, whispery beard that recalled the one on Crumb's chin that had so annoyed Ron. The boy who roared in silent amusement beside Dumbledore had a gleeful, wild look about him. His golden hair fell in curls to his shoulders. Harry wondered whether it was a young doge, but before he could check the caption, the door of the office opened. If Vic Nessie had not been looking over his shoulder as he entered, Harry would not have had time to pull the invisibility cloak over himself. As it was, he thought Vic Nessie might have caught a glimpse of movement, because for a moment or two he remained quite still, staring curiously at the place where Harry had just vanished. Perhaps deciding that all he had seen was Dumbledore scratching his nose on the front of the book, for Harry had hastily replaced it upon the shelf. Vic Nessie finally walked to the desk and pointed his wand at the quill standing ready in the ink pot. It sprang out and began scribbling a note to Umbridge. Very slowly, hardly daring to breathe, Harry backed out of the office into the open area beyond. The pamphlet makers were still clustered around the remains of the decoy detonator, which continued to hoot feebly as it smoked. Harry hurried off up the corridor as the young witch said, "I bet it sneaked up here from the experimental charms. They're so careless. Remember that poisonous duck?" Speeding back towards the lifts, Harry reviewed his options. It had never been likely that the locket was here at the Ministry, and there was no hope of bewitching its whereabouts out of Umbridge while she was sitting in a crowded court. Their priority now had to be to leave the Ministry before they were exposed, and try again another day. The first thing to do was to find Ron, and then they could work out a way of extracting Hermione from the courtroom. The lift was empty when it arrived. Harry jumped in and pulled off the invisibility cloak as it started its descent. To his enormous relief, when it rattled to a halt at level number 2, a soaking wet and wild-eyed Ron got in. Morning, he stammered to Harry, as the lift set off again. "Ron, it's me, Harry. Harry, blimey. I forgot what you look like. Why isn't Hermione with you?" "She had to go down to the courtrooms with Umbridge. She couldn't refuse and..." But before Harry could finish, the lift had stopped again. The doors opened, and Mr. Weasley walked inside, talking to an elderly witch whose blonde hair was teased so high it resembled an anthill. "I quite understand what you're saying, Wakanda, but I'm afraid I cannot be party to..." Mr. Weasley broke off. He had noticed Harry. It was very strange to have Mr. Weasley glare at him with that much dislike. The lift doors closed, and the four of them trundled downwards once more. "Oh, hello, Reg," said Mr. Weasley, looking around at the sound of the steady dripping from Ron's robes. "Isn't your wife in for questioning today? What's happened to you? Why are you so wet?" "Yaxley's office is raining," said Ron. He addressed Mr. Weasley's shoulder, and Harry felt he was scared that his father might recognise him if they looked directly into each other's eyes. "I couldn't stop it, so they sent me to get Bernie. Pillsworth, I think they said." "Yes, a lot of offices have been raining lately," said Mr. Weasley. "Did you try Meteorologinx Recanto? It worked for Bletchley." "Meteorologinx Recanto," whispered Ron. "No, I didn't. Thanks to... Arthur." The doors opened. The old witch, with the anthill hair, left, and Ron darted past her out of sight. Harry made to follow him, but found his path was blocked as Percy Weasley strode into the lift, his nose buried in some papers he was reading. Not until the doors had clanged shut again did Percy realise he was in the lift with his father. He glanced up, saw Mr. Weasley, turned radish red, and left the lift the moment the doors opened again. For the second time, Harry tried to get out, but this time found his way blocked by Mr. Weasley's arm. "One moment, Runcorn." The doors closed, and as they clanked down another floor, Mr. Weasley said, "I hear you laid information about Dirk Cresswell." Harry had the impression that Mr. Weasley's anger was no less because of the brush with Percy. He decided his best chance was to act stupid. "Sorry?" he said. "Don't pretend, Runcorn," said Mr. Weasley fiercely. "You tracked down the wizard who faked his family tree, didn't you?" So what if I did?" said Harry. "So Dirk Crosswell is 10 times the wizard you are," said Mr. Weasley quietly, as the lift sank ever lower. "And if he survives Azkaban, you'll have to answer to him. Not to mention his wife, his sons, and his friends." "Arthur," Harry interrupted, "you know you're being tracked, don't you?" "Is that a threat, Runcorn?" said Mr. Weasley loudly. "No," said Harry. "It's a fact. They're watching your every move." The lift doors opened. They had reached the atrium. Mr. Weasley gave Harry a scathing look and swept from the lift. Harry stood there, shaken. He wished he was impersonating somebody other than Runcorn. The lift doors clanged shut. Harry pulled out the invisibility cloak and put it back on. He would try to extricate Hermione on his own, while Ron was dealing with the reigning office. When the doors opened, he stepped out into the torchlit stone passageway, quite different from the wood-panelled and carpeted corridors above. As the lift rattles away again, Harry shivered slightly, looking towards the distant black door that marked the entrance to the Department of Mysteries. He set off, his destination not the black door, but a doorway he remembered on the left-hand side, which opened on to the flight of stairs down to the court chambers. His mind grappled with possibilities as he crept down them. He still had a couple of decoy detonators, but perhaps it would be better to simply knock on the courtroom door, enter as Runcorn, and ask for a quick word with Mafalda. Of course, he did not know whether Runcorn was sufficiently important to get away with this, and even if he managed it, Hermione's non-reappearance might trigger a search before they were clear of the Ministry. Lost in thought, he did not immediately register the unnatural chill that was creeping over him, as if he were descending into fog. It was becoming colder and colder with every step he took, a cold that reached down into his throat and tore at his lungs. And then he felt that stealing sense of despair, of hopelessness, filling him, expanding inside him. Dementors, he thought, and as he reached the foot of the stairs and turned to his right, he saw a dreadful scene. The dark passage outside the courtrooms was packed with tall, black-hooded figures, their faces completely hidden, their ragged breathing the only sound in the place. The petrified Muggleborns, brought in for questioning, sat, huddled and shivering on hard wooden benches. Most of them were hiding their faces in their hands, perhaps in an instinctive attempt to shield themselves from the Dementors' greedy mouths. Some were accompanied by families, others sat alone. The Dementors were gliding up and down in front of them, and the cold, and the hopelessness, and the despair of the place laid themselves upon Harry like a curse. Fight it, he told himself, but he knew he could not conjure a Patronus here without revealing himself instantly. So he moved forwards, as silently as he could, and with every step he took, numbness seemed to steal over his brain, but he forced himself to think of Hermione and of Ron, who needed him. Moving through the towering, black figures was terrifying. The eyeless faces, hidden beneath their hoods, turned as he passed, and he felt sure that they had sensed him. Sensed, perhaps, a human presence that still had some hope, some resilience. And then, abruptly and shockedly, amid the frozen silence, one of the dungeon doors on the left of the corridor was flung open, and screams echoed out of it. "No! No, I'm half-blood! I'm half-blood, I tell you! My father was a wizard, he was! Look him up! Erky Addleton! He's a well-known broomstick designer, look him up! I tell you, get your hands off me! Get your hands off!" "This is your final warning," said Umbridge's soft voice, magically magnified, so that it sounded clearly over the man's desperate screams. "If you struggle, you will be subjected to the Dementor's kiss." The man's screams subsided, but dry sobs echoed through the corridor. "Take him away," said Umbridge. Two Dementors appeared in the doorway of the courtroom, their rotten, scabbed hands clutching the upper arms of a wizard who appeared to be fainting. They glided away down the corridor with him, and the darkness they trailed behind them swallowed him from sight. "Next, Mary Catamol," called Umbridge. A small woman stood up. She was trembling from head to foot. Her dark hair was smoothed back into a bun, and she wore long, plain robes. Her face was completely bloodless. As she passed the Dementors, Harry saw her shudder. He did it instinctively, without any sort of plan, because he hated the sight of her walking alone into the dungeon. As the door began to swing closed, he slipped into the courtroom behind her. It was not the same room in which he had once been interrogated for improper use of magic. This one was much smaller, though the ceiling was quite as high. It gave the claustrophobic sense of being stuck at the bottom of a deep well. There were more Dementors in here, casting their freezing aura over the place. They stood like faceless sentinels in the corners, furthest from the high, raised platform. Here, behind a balustrade, sat Umbridge, with Yaxley on one side of her, and Hermione, quite as white-faced as Mrs. Cattermole, on the other. At the foot of the platform, a bright silver, long-haired cat prowled up and down, and Harry realised that it was there to protect the prosecutors from the despair that emanated from Dementors. That was for the accused to feel, not the accusers. "Sit down," said Umbridge in a soft, silky voice. Miss Cattermole stumbled to the single seat in the middle of the floor, beneath the raised platform. The moment she had sat down, Change clinked out of the arms of the chair and bounded her there. "You are Mary Elizabeth Cattermole?" asked Umbridge. Miss Cattermole gave a single, shaky nod. "Married to Reginald Cattermole, of the Magical Maintenance Department?" Miss Cattermole burst into tears. "I don't know where he is. He was supposed to meet me here." Umbridge ignored her. "Mother, to Maisie, Ellie, and Alfred Cattermole." Miss Cattermole sobbed even harder. "They're frightened. They think I might not come home." "Spare us," spat Yaxley. "The brats of mudbloods do not stir our sympathies." Miss Cattermole's sobs masked Harry's footsteps as he made his way carefully towards the steps that led up to the raised platform. The moment he had passed the place where the Patronus cat patrolled, he felt the change in temperature. It was warm and comfortable here. The Patronus, he was sure, was Umbridge's, and it glowed brightly because she was so happy here. In her element, upholding the twisted laws she had helped to write. Slowly and very carefully, he edged his way along the platform behind Umbridge, Yaxley, and Hermione, taking a seat behind the latter. He was worried about making Hermione jump. He thought about casting the Muffliato charm upon Umbridge and Yaxley, but even murmuring the word might cause Hermione alarm. Then, Umbridge raised her voice to address Miss Cattermole, and Harry seized his chance. "I'm behind you," he whispered in Hermione's ear. As he had expected, she jumped so violently, she nearly overturned the bottle of ink with which she was supposed to be recording the interviews. But both Umbridge and Yaxley were concentrating upon Miss Cattermole, and this went unnoticed. "A wand was taken from you upon your arrival at the Ministry today, Miss Cattermole," Umbridge was saying. 8 3/4 inches. Cherry. Unicorn hair core. Do you recognize that description?" Miss Cattermole nodded, mopping her eyes on her sleeve. "Could you please tell us from which witch or wizard you took that wand?" "I took," sobbed Miss Cattermole. "I didn't take it from anybody. I bought it when I was 11 years old. It chose me." She cried harder than ever. Umbridge laughed a soft, girlish laugh that made Harry want to attack her. She leaned forwards over the barrier, the better to observe her victim, and something gold swung forwards too, and dangled over the void. The locket. Hermione had seen it. She let out a little squeak, but Umbridge and Yaxley, still intent upon their prey, were deaf to everything else. "No," said Umbridge. "No, I don't think so. Miss Cattermole, wands only choose witches or wizards. You are not a witch. I have your responses to the questionnaire that was sent to you here. Mafalda, pass them to me." Umbridge held out a small hand. She looked so toad-like at that moment that Harry was quite surprised not to see webs between the stubby fingers. Hermione's hands were shaking with shock. She fumbled in a pile of documents balanced on the chair beside her. Finally, withdrawing a wad of parchment with Miss Cattermole's name on it. That's pretty, Dolores," she said, pointing at the pendant gleaming in the ruffled folds of Umbridge's blouse. What? Snapped Umbridge, glancing down. Oh, yes. An old family heirloom, she said, patting the locket lying on a large bosom. The S stands for Selwyn. I am related to the Selwyns. Indeed, there are few pure-blood families to whom I am not related. A pity, she continued in a louder voice, flicking through Miss Catamol's questionnaire, that the same cannot be said for you. Parents, professions, greengrocers. He actually laughed, jeeringly. Below, the fluffy silver cat patrolled up and down, and the Dementors stood waiting in the corners. It was Umbridge's lie that brought the blood surging into Harry's brain, and obliterated his sense of caution. That the locket she had taken as a bribe from a petty criminal was being used to bolster her own pureblood credentials. He raised his wand, not even troubling to keep it concealed beneath the invisibility cloak, and said, "Stupefy!" There was a flash of red light. Umbridge crumpled, and her forehead hit the edge of the balustrade. Miss Catamol's papers slid off her lap onto the floor, and, down below, the prowling silver cat vanished. Ice-cold air hit them like an oncoming wind. Yaxley, confused, looked around for the source of the trouble and saw Harry's disembodied hand and wand pointing at him. He tried to draw his own wand, but too late. "Stupefy!" Yaxley slid to the ground to lie curled on the floor. "Harry! Hermione, if you think I was going to sit here and let her pretend... Harry! Miss Catamol!" Harry whirled around, throwing off his invisibility cloak. Down below, the Dementors had moved out of the corners. They were gliding towards the woman chained to the chair. Whether because the Patronus had vanished, or because they sensed their own master were no longer in control, they seemed to have abandoned restraint. Miss Catamol let out a troubled scream of fear as a slimy, scabbed hand grasped her chin and forced her face back. "Expecto Patronum!" The silver stag soared from the tip of Harry's wand and leapt towards the Dementors, which fell back and melted into the dark shadows again. The stag's light, more powerful and more warming than the cat's protection, filling the whole dungeon as it cattered around and around the room. "Get the Horcrux!" Harry told Hermione. He ran back down the steps, stuffing the invisibility cloak back into his bag, and approached Miss Catamol. "You," she whispered, gazing into his face. But Reg said you were the one who submitted my name for questioning." "Did I?" muttered Harry, tugging at the chains binding her arms. "Well, I've had to change her heart. Defindo!" Nothing happened. "Hermione, how do I get rid of these chains?" "Wait, I'm trying something up here." "Hermione, we're surrounded by Dementors." "I know that, Harry, but if she wakes up and the locket's gone, I need to duplicate it. Germinio." "There, that should fool her." Hermione came running downstairs. "Let's see. Relatio." The chains clinked and withdrew into the arms of the chair. Miss Catamol looked just as frightened as ever before. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You're going to leave here with us," said Harry, pulling her to her feet. "Go home, grab your children and get out. Get out of the country if you got to. Disguise yourselves and run. You've seen how it is. You won't get anything like a fair hearing here." "Harry," said Hermione, "how are you going to get out of here with all those Dementors outside the door?" "Patronuses," said Harry, pointing his wand at his own. The stag slowed and walked, still gleaming brightly, towards the door. "As many as we can muster. Do yours, Hermione." Expecto Patronum," said Hermione. Nothing happened. "It's the only spell she's ever had trouble with," Harry told a completely bemused Miss Catamol. "Bit unfortunate, really. Come on, Hermione." "Expecto Patronum." A silver orb burst from the end of Hermione's wand and swam gracefully through the air to join the stag. "Come on," said Harry, and he led Hermione and Miss Catamol to the door. When the Patronuses glided out of the dungeon, there were cries of shock from the people waiting outside. Harry looked around. The Dementors were falling back on both sides of them, melding into the darkness, scattering before the silver creatures. "It's been decided that you should all go home and go into hiding with your families," Harry told the waiting Muggleborns, who were dazzled by the light of the Patronuses and still cowering slightly. "Go abroad if you can. Just get well away from the Ministry. That's the, new official position. Now, if you'll just follow the Patronuses, you'll be able to leave from the antrum." They managed to get up off the stone steps without being intercepted, but as they approached the lifts, Harry started to have misgivings. If they emerged into the atrium with a silver stag, an otter soaring alongside it, and 20 or so people, half of them accused Muggleborns, he could not help feeling that they would become unwanted attention. He had just reached this unwelcome conclusion when a lift clanged to a halt in front of them. "Reg!" screamed Miss Catamol. and she threw herself into Ron's arms. Runcorn let me out. He attacked Umbridge and Yaxley, and he told us all to leave the country. I think we'd better do it, Reg. I really do. Let's hurry home and fetch the children and... Why are you so wet? Water, muttered Ron, disengaging himself. Harry, they know there are intruders inside the ministry. Something about a hole in Umbridge's office door. I reckon we've got about 5 minutes, if that. Hermione's Patronus vanished with a pop as she turned a horror-struck face to Harry. Harry, if we're trapped here, we won't be if we move fast, said Harry. He addressed the silent group behind them, who were all gawping at him. Who's got wands? About half of them raised their hands. Okay, all of you who haven't got wands need to attach yourselves to somebody who has. We'll need to be fast, before they stop us. Come on! They managed to cram themselves into 2 lifts. Harry's Patronus stood sentinel before the golden grills as they shut and the lifts began to rise. Level 8, said the witch's cool voice. Atrium. Harry knew at once that they were in trouble. The atrium was full of people, moving from fireplace to fireplace, sealing them off. Harry, squeaked Hermione, what are we going to... Stop! Harry thundered, and the powerful voice of Runcorn echoed through the atrium. The wizard sealing the fireplaces froze. Follow me, he whispered to the group of terrified muggleborns, who moved forwards in a huddle, shepherded by Ron and Hermione. What's up, Albert? Said the same balding wizard, who had followed Harry out of the fireplace earlier. He looked nervous. This lot need to leave before you steal the exits, said Harry, with all the authority he could muster. The group of wizards in front of him looked at one another. We've been told to steal all exits and not let anyone... Are you contradicting me? Harry blustered. Would you like me to have your family tree examined, like I had Dirk Cresswell's? Sorry, gasped the balding wizard, backing away. I didn't mean nothing, Albert, but I thought they were in for questioning and... Their blood is pure, said Harry, and his deep voice echoed impressively through the hall. Purer than many of yours, I dare say. Off you go. He boomed to the muggleborns, who scurried forwards into the fireplaces and began to vanish in pairs. The mystery wizards hung back, some looking confused, others scared and resentful. Then, Mary! Miss Catamole looked over her shoulder. The real Reg Catamole, no longer vomiting, but pale and wan, had just come running out of the lift. Reg? She looked from her husband to Ron, who swore loudly. The balding wizard gaped, his head turning ludicrously from one Reg Catamole to the other. Hey, what's going on? What is this? Seal the exit! Seal it! Yaxley had burst out from another lift and was running towards the group beside the fireplaces, into which all the muggleborns, but Miss Catamole, had now vanished. As the balding wizard lifted his wand, Harry raised an enormous fist and punched him, sending him flying through the air. He's been helping muggleborns escape, Yaxley! Harry shouted. The balding wizard's colleagues set up an uproar, under cover of which Ron grabbed Miss Catamole, pulled her into the still open fireplace, and disappeared. Confused, Yaxley looked from Harry to the punch wizard, while the real Reg Catamole screamed, My wife! Who was that with my wife? What's going on? Harry saw Yaxley's head turn, saw an inkling of the truth dawn in that brute's face. Come on! Harry shouted at Hermione. He seized her hand, and they jumped into the fireplace together, as Yaxley's curse sailed over Harry's head. They spun for a few seconds, before shooting up out of a toilet in a cubicle. Harry flung open the door. Ron was standing there, beside the sinks, still wrestling with Miss Catamole. Reg, I don't understand. Let go, I'm not your husband. You've got to go home. There was a noise in the cubicle behind them. Harry looked around. Yaxley had just appeared. Let's go, Harry yelled. He seized Hermione by the hand, and Ron by the arm, and turned on the spot. Darkness engulfed them, along the sensation of compressing bands. But something was wrong. Hermione's hand seemed to be sliding out of his grip. He wondered whether she was going to suffocate. He could not breathe or see, and the only solid things in the world were Ron's arm and Hermione's fingers, which were slowly slipping away. And then he saw the door of number 12, Grimmauld Place, with its serpent door knocker. But before he could draw breath, there was a scream and a flash of purple light. Hermione's hand was suddenly vice-like upon his, and everything went dark again. Chapter 14. The Thief. Harry opened his eyes and was dazzled by golden green. He had no idea what had happened. He only knew that he was lying on what seemed to be leaves and twigs. struggling to draw breath into lungs that felt flattened. He blinked and realized that the gaudy glare was sunlight streaming through a canopy of leaves from above him. Then an object twitched close to his face. He pushed himself to his hands and knees, ready to face some small, fierce creature, but saw that the object was Ron's foot. Looking around, Harry saw that they and Hermione were laying on a forest floor, apparently alone. Harry's first thought was of the Forbidden Forest, and for a moment, even though he knew how foolish and dangerous it would be for them to appear in the grounds at Hogwarts, his heart leapt at the thought of sneaking through the trees to Hagrid's hut. However, in the few moments it took for Ron to give a low groan and Harry to start crawling towards him, he realized that this was not the Forbidden Forest. The trees looked younger. They were more widely spaced, the ground clearer. He met Hermione, also on her hands and knees, at Ron's head. The moment his eyes fell upon Ron, all other concerns fled Harry's mind, for blood drenched the whole of Ron's left side, and his face stood out, greyish-white, against the leaf-strewn earth. The Polyjuice potion was wearing off now. Ron was halfway between Cattermole and himself in appearance, his hair turning redder and redder as his face drained to the little colour it had left. "What's happened to him?" "Splinched," said Hermione, her fingers already busy at Ron's sleeve, where the blood was wettest and darkest. Harry watched, horrified, as she tore open Ron's shirt. He had always thought of splinching as something comical, but this, his insides crawled unpleasantly as Hermione laid bare Ron's upper arm, where a great chunk of Ron's flesh was missing, scooped cleanly away as though by a knife. "Harry, quickly, in my bag, there's a small bottle labelled Essence of Dittany." "Bag, right." Harry sped to the place where Hermione had landed, seized the tiny beaded bag, and thrust his hand inside it. At once, object after object began presenting itself to his touch. He felt the leather spines of books, woolly sleeves of jumpers, heels of shoes. "Quickly!" He grabbed his wand from the ground and pointed it into the depths of the magical bag. "Accio Dittany!" A small brown bottle zoomed out of the bag. He caught it and hastened back to Hermione and Ron, whose eyes were now half closed. Strips of white eyeball, all that was visible between his lids. "He's fainted," said Hermione, who was also rather pale. She no longer looked like Mafalda, though her hair was still grey in places. "Unstopper it for me, Harry. My hands are shaking." Harry wrenched the stopper off the little bottle. Hermione took it and poured 3 drops of the potion on the bleeding wound. Greenish smoke billowed upwards, and when it had cleared, Harry saw that the bleeding had stopped. The wound now looked several days old. New skin stretched over what had just been open flesh. "Wow," said Harry. "It's all I feel safe doing," said Hermione shakingly. "There are spells that would put him completely right, but I daren't try it in case I do them wrong and cause more damage. He's lost so much blood already." "How did he get hurt? I mean..." Harry shook his head, trying to clear it, to make sense of whatever had just taken place. "Why are we here? I thought we were going back to Grimmauld Place." Hermione took a deep breath. She looked close to tears. "Harry, I don't think we're going to be able to make it back there." "Would you..." "As we disapparated, he actually caught hold of me, and I couldn't get rid of him. He was too strong, and he was holding on when we arrived at Grimmauld Place. And then, well, I think he must have seen the door, and thought we were stopping there. So he slackened his grip, and I managed to shake him off, and I brought us here instead. But then, where's he? Hang on, you don't mean he's at Grimmauld Place? He can't get in there." Her eyes sparkled with hushed tears as she nodded. "Harry, I think he can. I forced him to let go of a revulsion jinx, but I'd already taken him inside the Fidelius charm protection. Since Dumbledore died, we're secret keepers, so I've given him the secret, haven't I?" There was no pretending. Harry was sure she was right. It was a serious blow. If he actually could now get inside the house, there was no way they could return. Even now, he could be bringing other Death Eaters in there by apparition, gloomy and oppressive though the house was. It had been their own safe refuge. Even now that creature was so much happier and friendlier, a kind of home. With a twinge of regret that had nothing to do with food, Harry imagined the house elf busying himself over steak and kidney pie that Harry, Ron and Hermione would never eat. "Harry, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Don't be stupid. It wasn't your fault. If anything, it was mine." Harry put his hand in his pocket and drew out Mad Eye's eye. Hermione recoiled, looking horrified. Umbridge had it stuck in her office door to spy on people. I couldn't leave it there, but that's how they knew there were intruders. Before Hermione could answer, Ron groaned and opened his eyes. He was still grey, and his face glistened with sweat. How do you feel? Hermione whispered. Lousy, croaked Ron, wincing as he felt his injured arm. Where are we? In the woods, where they held the Quidditch World Cup, said Hermione. I wanted somewhere enclosed, undercover, and this was the first place you thought of, Harry finished for her, glancing around at the apparently deserted glade. He could not help remembering what had happened the last time they had apparated to the first place Hermione had thought of. How Death Eaters had found them within minutes. Had it been legitimacy? Did Voldemort or his henchmen know? Even now, where Hermione had taken them? Do you reckon we should get a move on? Ron asked Harry. And Harry could tell, by the look on Ron's face, he was thinking the same. I don't know. Ron still looked pale and clammy. He had made no attempt to sit up, and it looked as though he was too weak to do so. The prospect of moving him was daunting. Let's stay here for now, Harry said, looking relieved. Hermione sprang to her feet. Where are you going? Asked Ron. If we're staying, we should put some protective enchantments around the place, she replied. And raising her wand, she began to walk in a wide circle around Harry and Ron, murmuring incantations as she went. Harry saw little disturbances in the surrounding air. It was as if Hermione had cast a heat haze upon their clearing. Salvio Hexia, Protego Totalum, Repelio, Muglatum, Muffliato. You could get out the tent, Harry. Tent? In the bag! In the... Oh, of course, said Harry. He did not bother to grope inside it this time, but used another summoning charm. The tent emerged in a lumpy mass of canvas, rope and poles. Harry recognised it, partially because of the smell of the cats, as the same tent in which they had slept on the night of the Quidditch World Cup. I thought this belonged to that bloke Perkins at the Ministry, he asked, starting to disentangle the tent pegs. Apparently he didn't want it back. His lumbago's so bad, said Hermione, now performing complicated figure of 8 movements with her wand. So Ron's dad said I could borrow it. Erecto, she added, pointing her wand at the misshapen canvas, which, in one fluid motion, rose into the air and settled, fully constructed, onto the ground before Harry, out of whose startled hands a tent peg soared, to land with a final thud at the end of a guy rope. Cave Imicium, Hermione finished, with a skyward flourish. That's as much as I can do. At the very least, we should know they're coming. I can't guarantee it will keep out Don't say the name, Ron cut across her, his voice harsh. Harry and Hermione looked at each other. I'm sorry, Ron said, moaning a little, as he raised himself to look at them. But it feels like a jinx or something. Can't we call him you-know-who? Please. Dumbledore said fear of a name, began Harry. In case you hadn't noticed, mate, calling you-know-who by his name didn't do Dumbledore much good in the end, Ron snapped back. Just show you-know-who some respect, will you? Respect, Harry repeated. But Hermione shot him a warning look. Apparently, he was not to argue with Ron while the latter was in such a weakened condition. Harry and Hermione half carried, half dragged Ron through the entrance of the tent. The interior was exactly as Harry remembered it, a small flat, complete with bathroom and tiny kitchen. He shoved aside an old armchair and lowered Ron carefully onto the lower berth of the bunk bed. Even this very short journey had turned Ron whiter still, and once they had settled him onto the mattress, he closed his eyes again and did not speak for a while. I'll make some tea, said Hermione breathlessly, pulling kettle and mugs from the depths of her bag and heading towards the kitchen. Harry found the hot drink as welcome as the fire whiskey had been on the night that Mad Eye had died. It seemed to burn away the little of the fear fluttering in his chest. After a minute or two, Ron broke the silence. What do you reckon happened to the Catamoles? With any luck, they'll have gotten away, said Hermione, clutching her hot mug for comfort. As long as Mr. Catamole had his wits about him, he'd have transported Miss Catamole by side-along apparition, and they'll be fleeing the country right now with their children. That's what Harry told her to do. Blimey, I hope they escaped, said Ron, leaning back on his pillows. The tea seemed to be doing him some good. A little of his colour had returned. I didn't get the feeling Reg Catamole was all the quick-witted, though. The way everyone was talking to me when I was him. God, I hope they made it. If they both end up in Azkaban because of us. Harry looked over at Hermione, and the question he had been about to ask, about whether Miss Cattermole's lack of wand would prevent her apparating alongside her husband, died in his throat. Hermione was watching Ron fret over the fate of the Cattermoles, and there was such tenderness in their expression that Harry felt almost as if he had surprised her in the act of kissing him. So, have you got it? Harry asked her, partially to remind her that he was there. Got what? She said, with a little start. What did we just go through all that for? The locket! Where's the locket? You got it, shouted Ron, raising himself a little higher on his pillows. No one tells me anything. Blimey, you could have mentioned it. Well, we were running for our lives from the Death Eaters, weren't we? Said Hermione. Here, and she pulled the locket out of her pocket of her robes and handed it to Ron. It was as large as a chicken's egg, an ornate letter S, inlaid with many small green stones, glinted dully in the diffused light shining through the tent's canvas roof. There isn't any chance someone's destroyed it since Creature had it? Asked Ron hopefully. I mean, are we sure it's still a Horcrux? I think so, said Hermione, taking it back from him and looking at it closely. There'd be some sign of damage if it had been magically destroyed. She passed it to Harry, who turned it over in his fingers. The thing looked perfect, pristine. He remembered the mangled remains of the diary, and how the stone in the Horcrux ring had been cracked open when Dumbledore destroyed it. I reckon Creature's right, said Harry. We're going to have to work out how to open this thing before we can destroy it. Sudden awareness of what he was holding, of what lived behind the little golden doors, hit Harry as he spoke. Even after all their efforts to find it, he felt a violent urge to fling the locket from him, mastering himself again. He tried to prise the locket apart with his fingers, then attempted the charm Hermione had used to open Regulus's bedroom door. Neither worked. He handed the locket back to Ron and Hermione, each of whom did their best, but were no more successful at opening it than he had been. Can you feel it, though? Ron asked in a harsh voice. He held it tight in his clenched fist. What do you mean? Ron passed the Horcrux to Harry. After a moment or two, Harry thought he knew what Ron meant. Was it his own blood pulsing through his veins that he could feel? Or was it something beating inside the locket, like a tiny metal heart? What are we going to do with it? Hermione asked. Keep it safe till we work out how to destroy it, Harry replied. And, little though he wanted to, he hung the chain around his neck, dropping the locket out of sight beneath his robes, where it rested against his chest, beside the pouch Hagrid had given him. I think we should take it in turns to keep watch outside the tent, he added to Hermione, standing up and stretching. And we'll need to think about some food as well. You stay here, he added sharply, as Ron attempted to sit up and turned a nasty shade of green, with the sneakoscope Hermione had given Harry for his birthday, set carefully upon the table in the tent. Harry and Hermione spent the rest of the day sharing the role of lookout. However, the sneakoscope remained silent and still upon its point all day. And whether because of the protective enchantments and muggle-repelling charms Hermione had spread around them, or because people rarely ventured this way, their patch of wood remained deserted apart from occasional birds and squirrels. Evening brought no change. Harry lit his wand as he swapped places with Hermione at 10 o'clock, and looked out upon a deserted scene, noting the bats fluttering high above him across the single patch of starry sky, visible from their protected clearing. He felt hungry now, and a little light-headed. Hermione had not packed any food in her magical bag, as she had assumed that they would be returning to Grimmauld Place that night, so they had had nothing to eat except some wild mushrooms that Hermione had collected from amongst the nearest trees and stewed in a billy can. After a couple of mouthfuls, Ron had pushed his portion away, looking queasy. Harry had only preserved so as not to hurt Hermione's feelings. The surrounding silence was broken by odd rustlings and what sounded like cracking of twigs. Harry thought that they were caused by animals rather than people, yet he kept his wand held tight at the ready. His insides, already uncomfortable due to their inadequate helping of rubbery mushrooms, tingled with unease. He had thought that he would feel elated if they managed to steal back the Horcrux, but somehow he did not. All he felt, as he sat there looking out at the darkness, of which his wand lit only a tiny part, was worried about what would happen next. It was as though he had been hurtling towards this point for weeks, months, maybe even years. But now he had come to an abrupt halt, ran out of road. There were other Horcruxes out there somewhere, but he did not have the faintest idea where they could be. He did not even know what all of them were. Meanwhile, he was at a loss to know how to destroy the only one that he had found, the Horcrux that currently lay against the bare flesh of his chest. Curiously, it had not taken heat away from his body, but lay so cold against his skin, it might just have emerged from icy water. From time to time, Harry thought, or perhaps imagined, that he could feel the tiny heartbeat tickling irregularly alongside his own. Nameless forebodings crept up on him as he sat there in the dark. He tried to resist them, pushed them away, yet they came at him relentlessly. Neither can live, while the other survives. Ron and Hermione, now talking softly behind him in the tent, could walk away if they wanted to. He could not, and it seemed to Harry, as he sat there, trying to master his own fear and exhaustion, that the Horcrux against his chest was ticking away the time he had left. Stupid idea, he told himself. Don't think that. His skull was starting to prickle again. He was afraid that he was making it happen by having these thoughts, and tried to direct them into another channel. He thought of poor Creature, who had expected them home, and had received Yaxley instead. Would the elf keep silent, or would he tell the Death Eater everything he knew? Harry wanted to believe that Creature had changed towards him in the past month, that he would be loyal now. But who knew what would happen? What if the Death Eaters tortured the elf? Sick images swarmed into Harry's head, and he tried to push these away too, for there was nothing he could do for Creature. He and Hermione had already decided against trying to summon him. What if someone from the Ministry came too? They could not count on elfish apparition being free from the same flaw that had taken Yaxley to Grimmauld Place on the hem of Hermione's sleeve. Harry's skull was burning now. He thought that there was so much that he did not know. Lupin had been right about the magic they had never encountered or imagined. Why hadn't Dumbledore explained more? Had he thought there'd be more time, that he would live for years, for centuries perhaps, like his friend Nicholas Flamel? If so, he had been wrong. Snape had seen to that. Snape, the sleeping snake, who had struck at the top of the tower. And Dumbledore had fallen. Fallen. Give it to me, Gregorovitch. Harry's voice was high, clear and cold, his wand held in front of him by a long-fingered white hand. The man at whom he was pointing was suspended upside down in mid-air. Though there was no rope holding him, he swung there, invisibly and eerily bound, his limbs wrapped around him, his terrified face on a level with Harry's, ruddy due to the mud that had rushed to his head. He had pure white hair and a thick, bushy beard, had trushed up Father Christmas. I have it not. I have it no more. It was many years ago, stolen from me. Do not lie to Lord Voldemort, Gregorovitch. He knows. He always knows. The hanging man's pupils were wide, dilated with fear, and they seemed to swell bigger and bigger until their blackness swallowed Harry whole. And now Harry was hurrying along a dark corridor in stout little Gregorovitch's wake as he held a lantern aloft. Gregorovitch burst into the room at the end of the passage, and his lantern illuminated what looked like a workshop. Wood shavings and gold gleamed in the swinging pool of light, and there on the window ledge sat perched, like a giant bird, a young man with golden hair. In the split second that the lantern's light illuminated him, Harry saw the delight upon his handsome face. Then, the intruder shot a stunning spell from his wand and jumped neatly backwards out of the window with a crow of laughter. And Harry was hurtling back out of those wide, tunnel-like pupils, and Gregorovitch's face was stricken with terror. Who was the thief, Gregorovitch? Said the high, cold voice. I do not know. I never knew. A young man. No. Please. Please. A scream that went on, and then a burst of green light. Harry! He opened his eyes, panting, his forehead throbbing. He had passed out against the side of the tent, had slid sideways down the canvas, and was sprawled on the ground. He looked up at Hermione, whose bushy hair obscured the tiny patch of sky visible through the dark branches high above them. Dream, he said, sitting up quickly and attempting to meet Hermione's glower with a look of innocence. Must have dozed off. Sorry. I know it was your scar. I can tell by the look on your face. You were looking into Don't say his name, came Ron's angry voice from the depths of the tent. Fine, retorted Hermione. You know who's mine then. I didn't mean it to happen, Harry said. It was a dream. Can you control what you dream about, Hermione? If you just learn to apply occlumency. But Harry was not interested in being told off. He wanted to discuss what he'd just seen. He's found Grigorovich, Hermione, and I think he's killed him. But before he killed him, he read Grigorovich's mind and I saw... I think I'd better take over the watch if you're so tired you're falling asleep, said Hermione coldly. I can finish the watch. No, you're obviously exhausted. Go and lie down. She dropped down in the mouth of the tent, looking stubborn, angry, but wishing to avoid a row. Harry ducked back inside. Ron's still pale face was poking out from the lower bunk. Harry climbed into the one above him, lay down, and looked up at the dark canvas ceiling. After several moments, Ron spoke in a voice so low they would not carry to Hermione, huddled in the entrance. What's you know who doing? Harry screwed up his eyes in the effort to remember every detail, then whispered into the darkness. He found Grigorovich. He had him tied up. He was torturing him. How's Grigorovich supposed to make him a new wand if he's tied up? I dunno. It's weird, isn't it? Harry closed his eyes, thinking of all he had seen and heard. Then, the more he recalled, the less sense it made. Voldemort said nothing about Harry's wand. Nothing about the twin cords. Nothing about Grigorovich making a new and more powerful wand to beat Harry's. He wanted something from Grigorovich, Harry said, eyes still closed tight. He asked him to hand it over, but Grigorovich said it had been stolen from him. And then, he remembered how he, as Voldemort, had seemed to hurtle through Grigorovich's eyes, into his memories. He read Grigorovich's mind, and I saw this young bloke, perched on a windowsill, and he fired a curse at Grigorovich, and jumped out of sight. He stole it. He stole whatever you know who was after. And I think I've seen him somewhere. Harry wished he could have another glimpse of the laughing boy's face. The theft had happened many years ago, according to Grigorovich. Why did the young thief look familiar? The noises of surrounding woods were muffled inside the tent. All Harry could hear was Ron's breathing. After a while, Ron whispered, Couldn't you see what the thief was holding? No. It must have been something small. Harry, the wooden slats on Ron's bunk, creaked as he repositioned himself in bed. Harry, you don't reckon you know who's after something else to turn into a Horcrux? I dunno, said Harry slowly. Maybe, but wouldn't it be dangerous for him to make another one? Didn't Hermione say he had pushed his soul to the limit already? Yeah. But maybe he doesn't know that. Yeah. Maybe, said Harry. He had been sure that Voldemort was looking for a way around the problem for the twin cores. Sure that Voldemort sought a solution from the old wand maker. And yet he had killed him. Apparently without asking him a single question about wand lore. What was Voldemort trying to find? Why? With the Ministry of Magic and the Wizarding World at his feet, was he far away, intent on the pursuit of an object that Grigorovich had once owned, and which had been stolen by the unknown thief? Harry could still see the blonde-haired youth's face. It was merry, wild. There was a Fred and Georgish air of triumph trickery about him. He had soared from the window, still like a bird, and Harry had seen him before. But he could not think where. With Grigorovich dead, it was the merry-faced thief who was in danger now, and it was on him that Harry's thoughts dwelled, as Ron's snores began to rumble from the lower bunk, and as he himself drifted slowly into sleep once more. Chapter 15. The Goblin's Revenge. Early next morning, before the other two were awake, Harry left the tent to search the woods around them for the oldest, most gnarled and resilient-looking tree he could find. There, in its shadow, he buried Mad-Eye Moody's eye, and marked the spot by gouging a small cross in the bark with his wand. It was not much, but Harry felt that Mad-Eye would have much preferred this to being stuck on Dolores Umbridge's door. Then, he returned to the tent to wait for the others to wake, and discuss what they were going to do next. Harry and Hermione felt that it was best not to stay anywhere too long, and Ron agreed, with the sole proviso that their next move took them within reach of a bacon sandwich. Hermione, therefore, removed the enchantments she had placed around the clearing, while Harry and Ron obliterated all the marks and impressions on the ground that might show that they had camped there. Then, they disapparated to the outskirts of a small market town. Once they had pitched a tent in the shelter of a small copse of trees, and surrounded it with freshly cast defensive enchantments, Harry ventured out under the invisibility cloak to find sustenance. This, however, did not go as planned. He had barely entered the town when an unnatural chill, a descending mist, and a sudden darkening of the skies made him freeze where he stood. "But you could make a brilliant Patronus," protested Ron, when Harry arrived back at the tent empty-handed, out of breath, and mouthing the single word, Dementors. "I couldn't make one," he panted, clutching a stitch in his side. "Wouldn't come." Their expressions of consternation and disappointment made Harry feel ashamed. It had been a nightmarish experience, seeing the Dementors gliding out of the mist in the distance, and realizing, as the paralyzing cold choked his lungs and a distant screaming filled his ears, that he was not going to be able to protect himself. It had only taken all of Harry's willpower to uproot himself from the spot and run, leaving the eyeless Dementors to glide amongst the Muggles, who might not be able to see them, but would assuredly feel the despair they cast wherever they went. "So we still haven't got any food?" "Shut up, Ron," snapped Hermione. "Harry, what happened? Why do you think you couldn't make your Patronus? You managed perfectly yesterday." "I don't know." He sat low in one of the Perkins' old armchairs, feeling more humiliated by the moment. He was afraid that something had gone wrong inside him. Yesterday seemed a long time ago. Today, he might have been 13 years old again, the only one who collapsed on the Hogwarts Express. Ron kicked a chair leg. "What?" he snarled at Hermione. "I'm starving. All I've had since I bled half to death is a couple of toadstools." "You go and fight your way through the Dementors then," said Harry, stung. "I would, but my arm's in a sling, in case you hadn't noticed." "That's convenient. And what's that supposed to—" "Of course," cried Hermione, clapping a hand to her forehead and startling both of them into silence. "Harry, give me the locket. Come on," she said impatiently, clicking her fingers at him when he did not react. "The Horcrux, Harry. You're still wearing it." She held out her hands, and Harry lifted the golden chain over his head. The moment it parted contact with Harry's skin, he felt free and oddly light. He hadn't even realized that he was clammy, or that there was a heavy weight pressing on his stomach, until both sensations lifted. "Better?" asked Hermione. "Yeah, loads better." "Harry," she said, crouching down in front of him, and using the kind of voice he associated with visiting the very sick. "You don't think you're being possessed, do you?" "What? No," he said defensively. "I remember everything we've done while I've been wearing it. I wouldn't know what I'd done if I'd been possessed, would I? Ginny told me that there were times that she couldn't remember anything." Said Hermione, looking down at the heavy locket. "Well, maybe we ought not to wear it. We can just keep it in the tent." "We are not leaving that Horcrux lying around," Harry stated firmly. "If we lose it, if it gets stolen—" "Oh, all right," said Hermione, and she placed it around her own neck and tucked it out of sight down the front of her shirt. "But we'll take it in turns wearing it, so nobody keeps it on too long." "Great," said Ron irritably. "And now we've sorted that out, can we please get some food?" "Fine, but we'll go somewhere else to find it," said Hermione, with half a glance at Harry. "There's no point staying where we know Dementors are swooping around." In the end, they settled for the night in a far-flung field belonging to a lonely farm, from which they had managed to obtain eggs and bread. "It's not stealing, is it?" asked Hermione in a troubled voice, as they devoured scrambled eggs on toast. "Not if I left some money under the chicken coop." Ron rolled his eyes and said, with his cheeks bulging, "Hermione, you worry too much. Relax." And indeed, it was much too easy to relax when they were comfortably well fed. The argument about the Dementors was forgotten in laughter that night, and Harry felt cheerful, even hopeful, as he took the first of the 3 night watches. This was their first encounter with the fact that a full stomach meant good spirits. An empty one, bickering and gloom. Harry was the least surprised by this, because he had suffered periods of near starvation at the Dursleys. Hermione bore up reasonably well on those nights where they managed to scavenge nothing but berries or stale biscuits. Her temper, perhaps, a little shorter than usual, and her silences rather dour. Ron, however, had always been used to 3 delicious meals a day, courtesy of his mother, or of the Hogwarts house elves, and hunger made him both unreasonable and irascible. Whenever lack of food coincided with Ron's turn to wear the Horcrux, he became downright unpleasant. "So where next?" was his constant refrain. He did not seem to have any ideas himself, but expected Harry and Hermione to come up with the plans, while he sat and brooded over the low food supplies. Accordingly, Harry and Hermione spent fruitless hours trying to decide where they might find the other Horcruxes, and how to destroy the one they had already got. Their conversations became increasingly repetitive, as they had no new information. As Dumbledore had told Harry that he believed Voldemort had hidden the Horcruxes in places important to him, they kept reciting, in a sort of dreary litany, those locations they knew that Voldemort had lived or visited. The orphanage, where he had been born and raised. Hogwarts, where he had been educated. Borgin and Burt's, where he had worked after leaving school. Then Albania, where he had spent his years of exile. These formed the basis of their speculations. Yeah, let's go to Albania. Shouldn't take more than an afternoon to search an entire country, said Ron sarcastically. There can't be anything there. He's already made 5 of his Horcruxes before he went into exile, and Dumbledore was certain the snake is the 6th, said Hermione. We know the snake's not in Albania. It's usually with Didn't I ask you to stop saying that? Fine. The snake is usually with you-know-who. Happy? Not particularly. I can't see him hiding anything at Borgin and Burt's, said Harry, who had made this point many times before, but said it again simply to break the nasty silence. Borgin and Burke were experts on dark objects. They would have recognised the Horcrux straight away. Ron yawned pointedly, repressing a strong urge to throw something at him. Harry ploughed on. I still reckon he might have hidden something at Hogwarts. Hermione sighed. But Dumbledore would have found it, Harry. Harry repeated the argument he kept bringing out in favour of this theory. Dumbledore said in front of me that he had never assumed he knew all the Hogwarts secrets. I'm telling you, if there was one place Oi! You know who then? Harry shouted, goading past endurance. If there was one place that was really important to you-know-who, it was Hogwarts. Oh, come on, scoffed Ron. He's school. Yeah, he's school. It was his first real home. The place that meant he was special. It meant everything to him, and even after he left. This is you-know-who we're talking about, right? Not you? Inquired Ron. He was tugging at the chain of the Horcrux around his neck. Harry was visited by a desire to seize it and throttle him. You told us that you-know-who asked Dumbledore to give him a job after he left, said Hermione. That's right, said Harry. And Dumbledore thought he only wanted to come back to try and find something. Probably another Founder's object, to make into another Horcrux. Yeah, said Harry. But he didn't get the job, did he? Said Hermione. So he never got the chance to find a Founder's object there, and hide it in the school. Okay then, said Harry defeated. Forget Hogwarts. Without any other leads, they travelled into London and, hidden beneath the invisibility cloak, searched for the orphanage in which Voldemort had been raised. Hermione stole into a library, and discovered from their records that the place had been demolished many years before. They visited its site, and found a tower block of offices. We could try digging in the foundations, Hermione suggested half-heartedly. He wouldn't have hidden the Horcrux here, Harry said. He had known it all along. The orphanage had been the place Voldemort had been determined to escape from. He would never have hidden a part of his soul there. Dumbledore had shown Harry that Voldemort sought grandeur or mystique in his hiding places. This dismal, grey corner of London was as far removed as you could imagine from Hogwarts, or a ministry, or a building like Gringotts, the Wizarding Bank, with its golden doors and marble floors. Even without any new ideas, they continued to move through the countryside, pitching the tent in a different place each night for security. Every morning, they made sure that they had removed all clues to their presence. Then set off to find another lonely and secluded spot, travelling by apparition to more woods, to the shadowy crevices of cliffs, to purple moors, gorse-covered mountainsides, and, once, a sheltered and pebbly cove. Every 12 hours or so, they passed a Horcrux between them, as though they were playing some perverse, slow-motion game of pass the parcel, where they dreaded the music stopping, because the reward was 12 hours of increased fear and anxiety. Harry's scar kept prickling. It happened most often, he noticed, when he was wearing the Horcrux. Sometimes, he could not stop himself reacting to the pain. What? What did you see? Demanded Ron, whenever he noticed Harry wince. A face, muttered Harry every time. The same face, the thief who stole from Grigorovitch. And Ron would turn away, making no effort to hide his disappointment. Harry knew that Ron was hoping to hear news of his family, or of the rest of the Order of the Phoenix. But after all, he, Harry, was not a television aerial. He could only see what Voldemort was thinking at the time, not tune in to whatever took his fancy. Apparently Voldemort was dwelling endlessly on the unknown youth with a gleeful face, whose name and whereabouts Harry felt sure Voldemort knew no better than he did. As Harry's scar continued to burn, and the merry, blonde-haired boy swam tantalizingly in his memory, he learned to suppress any sign of pain or discomfort, for the other two showed nothing but impatience at the mention of the thief. He could not entirely blame them, when they were so desperate for a lead on the Horcruxes. As the days stretched into weeks, Harry began to suspect that Ron and Hermione are having conversations without and about him. Several times they stopped talking abruptly when Harry entered the tent, and twice he came accidentally upon them, huddled a little distance away, heads together, and talking fast. Both times they fell silent when they realized he was approaching them, and hastened to appear busy collecting wood or water. Harry could not help wondering whether they had only agreed to come on what now felt like a pointless and rambling journey, because they thought he had some secret plan that they would learn in due course. Ron was making no effort to hide his bad mood, and Harry was starting to fear that Hermione too was disappointed by his poor leadership. In desperation, he tried to think of further Horcrux locations, but the only one that continued to occur to him was Hogwarts, and as neither of the others thought this at all likely, he stopped suggesting it. Autumn rolled over the countryside as they moved through it. They were now pitching their tent on mulches of fallen leaves. Natural mists joined those cast by the Dementors. Wind and rain added to their troubles. The fact that Hermione was getting better at identifying edible fungi could not altogether compensate for their continuing isolation. The lack of other people's company, or their total ignorance of what was going on in the war against Voldemort. "My mother," said Ron one night, as they sat in a tent on the riverbank in Wales, "can make food appear out of thin air." He prodded moodily at the lamps of charred, grey fish on his plate. Harry glanced automatically at Ron's neck, and saw, as he had expected, the golden chain on the Horcrux glinting there. He managed to fight down the impulse to swear at Ron, whose attitude would, he knew, improve slightly when the time came to take off the locket. "Your mother can't produce food out of thin air," said Hermione. "No one can. Food is the first of the 5 principal exceptions to Gamp's law of elemental transfigure—" "Oh, speak English, can't you?" Ron said, prizing a fishbone out from between his teeth. "It's impossible to make good food out of nothing. You can summon it if you know where it is. You can transform it. You can increase the quantity if you've already got some." "Well, don't bother increasing this. It's disgusting," said Ron. "Harry caught the fish, and I did my best with it. I notice I'm always the one who ends up sorting out the food, because I'm a girl, I suppose." "No, it's because you're supposed to be the best at magic," shot back Ron. Hermione jumped up, and bits of roast pike slid off her tin plate onto the floor. "You can do the cooking tomorrow, Ron. You can find the ingredients and try and charm them into something worth eating, and I'll sit here and pull faces and moan, and you can see how you—" "Shut up," said Harry, leaping to his feet and holding up both his hands. "Shut up, now!" Hermione looked outraged. "How can you side with him? He hardly ever does the cook." "Hermione, be quiet. I can hear someone." He was listening hard, his hands still raised, warning them not to talk. Then, over the rush and gush of the dark river beside them, he heard voices again. He looked around at the sneakoscope. It was not moving. "You cast a Muffliato charm over us, right?" he whispered at Hermione. "I did everything," she whispered back. "Muffliato, muggle repelling, and disillusionment charms, all of it. They shouldn't be able to hear or see us, whoever they are." Heavy scuffling and scraping noises, plus the sound of dislodged stones and twigs, told them that several people were clambering down the steep, wooded slope that descended to the narrow bank where they had pitched a tent. They drew their wands, waiting. The enchantments they had cast around themselves ought to be sufficient, in the near total darkness, to sheer them from the notice of muggles and normal witches and wizards. If these were Death Eaters, then perhaps their defences were about to be tested by dark magic for the first time. The voices became louder, but no more intelligible as the group of men reached the bank. Harry estimated that their owners were less than 20 feet away, but the cascading river made it impossible to tell for sure. Hermione snatched up the beaded bag and started to rummage. After a moment, she drew out 3 extendable ears and threw one each to Harry and Ron, who hastily inserted the ends of the flesh-coloured strings into their ears and fed the other ends out of the tent entrance. Within seconds, Harry heard a weary, male voice. "There ought to be a few salmon in here. Or do you reckon it's too early in the season? Accio salmon!" There are several distinct splashes, and then the slapping sounds of fish against flesh. Somebody grunted appreciatively. Harry pressed the extendable ear deeper into his own. Over the murmur of the river, he could make out more voices, but they were not speaking English, or any human language he had ever heard. It was a rough and unmelodious tongue. A string of rattling, guttural noises, and there seemed to be two speakers, one with a slightly lower, slower voice than the other. A fire danced in the light on the other side of the canvas. Large shadows passed between the tent and flames. The delicious smell of baking salmon wafted tantalizingly in their direction. Then came the clinking of cutlery on plates, and the first man spoke again. "Here, Griphook! Gornuk! Goblins!" Hermione mouthed at Harry, who nodded. "Thank you," said the goblins together in English. "So you three have been on the run how long?" asked a new, mellow and pleasant voice. It was vaguely familiar to Harry, who pictured a round-bellied, cheerful-faced man. 6 weeks. 7. I forgot," said the tired man. "Met up with Griphook in the first couple of days, and joined forces with Gornuk not long after. Nice to have a bit of company." There was a pause, while knives scraped plates, and tin mugs were picked up and replaced on the ground. "What made you leave, Ted?" continued the man. "Knew they were coming for me," replied mellow-voiced Ted, and Harry suddenly knew who he was. Tonks' father. "Heard Death Eaters were in the area last week, and decided I'd better run for it. Refused to register as a Muggle-born on principle, see? So I knew it was a matter of time. Knew I'd have to leave in the end. My wife should be okay. She's pure blood. And then I met Dean here. What, a few days ago, son?" "Yeah," said another voice. And Harry, Ron, and Hermione stared at each other, silent, but beside themselves with excitement. Surely they recognized the voice of Dean Thomas, their fellow Gryffindor. "Muggle-born, eh?" asked the first man. "Not sure," said Dean. "My dad left my mum when I was a kid. I've got no proof he was a wizard, though." There was silence for a while, except for the sounds of munching. Then Ted spoke again. "I've got to say, Dirk, I'm surprised to run into you. Pleased, but surprised. Where was you been caught?" "I was," said Dirk. "I was halfway to Azkaban when I made a break for it, stunned Dawlish and nicked his broom. It was easier than you'd think. I don't reckon he's quite right at the moment. Might be confounded. If so, I'd like to shake the hand of the witch or wizard who did it. Probably saved me life." There was another pause, in which the fire crackled and the river rushed on. Then Ted said, "And where do you fit in? I had the impression that goblins were for you-know-who on the whole." "You had a false impression," said a higher voice of the goblins. "We take no sides. This is a wizard's war." "How come you're in hiding then?" "I deemed it prudent," said the deeper voiced goblin, "having refused what I considered an impertinent request. I could see that my personal safety was in jeopardy." "What did they ask you to do?" asked Ted. "Duties ill befitted the dignity of my race," replied the goblin, his voice rougher and less human as he said it. "I am not a house elf." "What about you, Griphook?" "Similar reasons," said the higher voiced goblin. "Gringotts is no longer under the sole control of my race. I recognize no wizarding master." He added something under his breath, in gobbledygook, and Gornuk laughed. "What's the joke?" asked Dean. "He said," replied Dirk, "that there are things wizards don't recognize either." There was a short pause. "I don't get it," said Dean. "I had my small revenge before I left," said Griphook in English. "Good man. Goblin, I should say," amended Ted hastily. "Didn't manage to lock a Death Eater up in one of the old high-security vaults, I suppose?" "If I had, the sword would not have helped him break out," replied Griphook. Gornuk laughed again, and even Dirk gave a dry chuckle. "Dean and I are still missing something here," said Ted. "So is Severus Snape, though he does not know it," said Griphook, and the two goblins roared with malicious laughter. Inside the tent, Harry's breathing was shallow with excitement. He and Hermione stared at each other, listening as hard as they could. "Didn't you hear about that, Ted?" asked Dirk. "About the kids who tried to steal Gryffindor's sword out of Snape's office at Hogwarts?" An electric current seemed to course through Harry, jangling his every nerve as he stood rooted to the spot. "Never heard a word," said Ted. "Not in the Prophet, was it?" "Hardly," chortled Dirk. "Griphook here told me. He heard about it from Bill Weasley, who works for the bank. One of the kids who tried to take the sword was Bill's younger sister." Harry glanced towards Hermione and Ron, both of whom were clutched in the extendable ears as tightly as lifelines. She and a couple of friends got into Snape's office and smashed open the glass case where he was apparently keeping the sword. Snape caught them as they were trying to smuggle it down the staircase. Ah, God bless them, said Ted. What did they think? That they'd be able to use the sword on you-know-who? Or on Snape himself? Well, whatever they thought they were going to do with it, Snape decided the sword wasn't safe where it was, said Dirk. A couple of days later, once he had got the say-so from you-know-who, I imagine, he sent it down to London to be kept in Gringotts instead. The goblin started to laugh again. I'm still not seeing the joke, said Ted. It's a fake, rasped Griphook. The sword of Gryffindor? Oh yes, it is a copy, an excellent copy. It is true, but it was wizard-made. The original was forged centuries ago by goblins and had certain properties only goblin-made armour possesses. Wherever the genuine sword of Gryffindor is, it is not in a vault of Gringotts Bank. I see, said Ted. And I take it you didn't bother telling the Death Eaters this. I saw no reason to trouble them with the information, said Griphook smugly. And now, Ted and Dean joined in Gormac and Dirk's laughter. Inside the tent, Harry closed his eyes, willing someone to ask the question he needed answered. And after a minute that seemed 10, Dean obliged. He was, Harry remembered with a jolt, an ex-boyfriend of Ginny's too. What's happened to Ginny and the others? The ones who tried to steal it? Oh, they were punished, and cruelly, said Griphook indifferently. They're okay though, asked Ted quickly. I mean, the Weasleys don't need any more of their kids injured, do they? They suffered no serious harm. As far as I'm aware, said Griphook. Lucky for them, said Ted. With Snape's track record, I suppose we should just be glad they're still alive. You believe that story then, do you, Ted? Asked Dirk. You believe Snape killed Dumbledore? Course I do, said Ted. You're not going to sit there and tell me you think Potter had anything to do with it. Hard to know what to believe these days, muttered Dirk. I know Harry Potter, said Dean. I think he's the real thing, the chosen one, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, there's a lot who would like to believe he's that son, said Dirk. Me included. But where is he? Run for it, by the looks of things. You'd think, if he knew anything we don't, or had anything special going for him, he'd be out there now fighting, rallying resistance, instead of hiding. And you know, the Prophet made a pretty good case against him. The Prophet? Scoffed Ted. You deserve to be lied to if you're still reading that muck, Dirk. You want the facts? Try the Quibbler. There was a sudden explosion of choking and retching, plus a good deal of thumping. By the sound of it, Dirk had swallowed a fishbone. At last, he spluttered. The Quibbler! That lunatic ragger Zeno Lovegoods! It's not so lunatic these days, said Ted. You want to give it a look. Zeno is printing all the stuff the Prophet's ignoring. Not to mention, not a single mention of Crumplehorn Snorkax in the last issue. How long they'll let him get away with it, mind, I don't know. But Zeno says, front page of every issue, that any wizard who's against you-know-who ought to make helping Harry Potter their number one priority. Hard to help a boy who's vanished off the face of the earth, said Dirk. Listen, the fact that they haven't caught him yet's one hell of an achievement, said Ted. I'd take tips from him gladly. It's what we're trying to do. Stay free, isn't it? Yeah, well, you've got a point there, said Dirk heavily. With the whole ministry and all their informers looking for him, I'd expected him to be caught by now, mind. Who's to say they haven't already caught and killed him without publicising it? Ah, don't say that, Dirk, murmured Ted. There was a long pause, filled with more clattering of knives and forks. When they spoke again, it was to discuss whether they ought to sleep on the bank or retreat back up the wooded slope. Deciding the trees would give better cover, they extinguished their fire, then clambered back up the incline, their voices fading away. Harry, Ron and Hermione reeled in the extendable ears. Harry, who had found the need to remain silent increasingly difficult the longer they had eavesdropped, now found himself unable to say more than, Ginny, the sword. I know, said Hermione. She lunged for a tiny beaded bag, this time sinking her arm in it right up to the armpit. Here, we are, she said between gritted teeth, and she pulled out something that was evidently in the depths of the bag. Slowly, the edge of an ornate picture frame came into sight. Harry hurried to help her. As they lifted the empty portrait of Phineas Nigellus free of Hermione's bag, she kept her wand pointed at it, ready to cast a spell at any moment. If somebody swapped the real sword for the fake while it was in Dumbledore's office, she panted, as they propped the painting up against the side of the tent. Phineas Nigellus would have seen it happen. He hangs right beside the case." "Unless he was asleep," said Harry. But he still held his breath as Hermione knelt down in front of the empty canvas, her wand directed at its centre, cleared her throat, then said, Phineas? Phineas Nigellus." Nothing happened. "Phineas Nigellus," said Hermione again. "Professor Black, please could we talk to you? Please." "Please always helps," said a cold, snide voice, and Phineas Nigellus slid into his portrait. At once, Hermione cried, "Obscuro!" A black blindfold appeared over Phineas Nigellus's clever dark eyes, causing him to bump into the frame and shriek with pain. "What? How dare? What are you?" "I'm very sorry, Professor Black," said Hermione, "but it's a necessary precaution." "Remove this foul addition at once! Remove it, I say! You are ruining a great work of art! Where am I? What is going on?" "Never mind where we are," said Harry, and Phineas Nigellus froze, abandoning his attempts to peel off the painted blindfold. "Can that possibly be the voice of the elusive Mr. Potter?" "Maybe," said Harry, knowing that this would keep Phineas Nigellus's interest. "We've got a couple of questions to ask you about the Sword of Gryffindor." "Ah," said Phineas Nigellus, now turning his head this way and that in an effort to catch the sight of Harry. "Yes, that silly girl acted most unwisely there." "Shut up about my sister," said Ron roughly. Phineas Nigellus raised supercilious eyebrows. "Who else is here?" he asked, turning his head from side to side. "Your tone displeases me. The girl and her friends were foolhardy in the extreme, thieving from the headmaster." "They weren't thieving," said Harry. "That sword isn't Snape's. It belongs to Professor Snape's school," said Phineas Nigellus. "Exactly what claim did the Weasley girl have upon it? She deserved her punishment, as did the idiot Longbottom, and the Lovegood oddity." "Neville is not an idiot, and Luna is not an oddity," said Hermione. "Where am I?" repeated Phineas Nigellus, starting to wrestle with the blindfold again. "Where have you brought me? Why have you removed me from the house of my forebears?" "Never mind that. How did Snape punish Ginny, Neville and Luna?" asked Harry urgently. "Professor Snape sent them into the Forbidden Forest to do some work for the oath, Hagrid." "Hagrid's not an oath," said Hermione shrilly. "And Snape might have thought that was a punishment," said Harry. "But Ginny, Neville and Luna probably had a good laugh with Hagrid. The Forbidden Forest. They faced plenty worse than the Forbidden Forest. Big deal." He felt relieved. He had been imagining horrors, the Cruciatus curse at the very least. What we really wanted to know, Professor Black, is whether anyone else has, taken out the sword at all. Maybe it's been taken away for cleaning or something." Phineas Nigellus paused again in his struggles to free his eyes and sniggered. "Muggle-borns," he said. "Goblin-made armor does not require cleaning, simple girl. Goblin silver repels mundane dirt, imbibing only that which strengthens it." "Don't call Hermione simple," said Harry. "I grow weary of contradiction," said Phineas Nigellus. "Perhaps it is time for me to return to Headmaster's office." Still blindfolded, he began groping the side of his frame, trying to feel his way out of his picture, and back into the one at Hogwarts. Harry had a sudden inspiration. "Dumbledore! Can't you bring us Dumbledore?" "I beg your pardon?" asked Phineas Nigellus. "Professor Dumbledore's portrait. Couldn't you bring him along here, into yours?" Phineas Nigellus turned his face in the direction of Harry's voice. "Evidently, it is not only Muggleborns who are ignorant, Potter. The portraits of Hogwarts may commune with each other, but they cannot travel outside the castle except to visit a painting of themselves hanging elsewhere. Dumbledore cannot come here with me, and after the treatment I have received at your hands, I can assure you that I shall not be making a return visit." Slightly crestfallen, Harry watched Phineas redouble his attempts to leave his frame. "Professor Black," said Hermione, "couldn't you just tell us, please, when was the last time the sword was taken out of its case? Before Ginny took it out, I mean." Phineas snorted impatiently. "I believe that the last time I saw the sword of Gryffindor leave its case was when Professor Dumbledore used it to break open a ring." Hermione whipped around to look at Harry. Neither of them dared say more in front of Phineas Nigellus, who had at last managed to locate the exit. "Well, good night to you," he said, a little waspily. And he began to move out of sight again. Only the edge of his hat brim remained in view when Harry gave a sudden shout. "Wait! Have you told Snape you saw us?" Phineas Nigellus stuck his blindfolded head back into the picture. "Professor Snape has more important things on his mind than the many centuries of Albus Dumbledore. Goodbye, Potter. And with that, he vanished completely, leaving behind him nothing but his murky backdrop. Harry, Hermione cried. I know, Harry shouted. Unable to contain himself, he punched the air. It was more than he had dared to hope for. He strode up and down the tent, feeling that he might have ran a mile. He did not even feel hungry anymore. Hermione was squashing Phineas Nigellus's portrait back into the beaded bag. When she had fastened the clasp, she threw the bag aside and raised a shining face to Harry. The sword can destroy Horcruxes. Goblin-made blades imbibe only that which strengthens them. Harry, that sword's impregnated with basilisk venom, and Dumbledore didn't give it to me because he still needed it. He wanted to use it on the locket, and they must have realised they wouldn't have let him put it in his will. So he made a copy and put a fake in the glass case, and he left the real one where? They gazed at each other. Harry felt that the answer was dangling invisibly in the air above them, tantalisingly close. Why hadn't Dumbledore told him? Or had he, in fact, told Harry? But Harry had not realised it at the time. Think, whispered Hermione. Think, where would he have left it? Not at Hogwarts, said Harry, resuming his pacing. Somewhere in Hogsmeade, suggested Hermione. The Shrieking Shack, said Harry. Nobody ever goes in there. But Snape knows how to get in. Wouldn't that be a bit risky? Dumbledore trusted Snape, Harry reminded her. Not enough to tell him that he had swapped the swords, said Hermione. Yeah, you're right, said Harry, and he felt even more cheered at the thought that Dumbledore had had some reservations, however faint, about Snape's trustworthiness. So would he have hidden the sword well away from Hogsmeade then? What do you reckon, Ron? Ron? Harry looked around. For one bewildered moment, he thought that Ron had left the tent, then realised that Ron was lying in the shadow of a lower bunk, looking stony. Oh, remembered me, have you? He said. What? Ron snorted as he stared up at the underside of the upper bunk. You two carry on. Don't let me spoil your fun. Perplexed, Harry looked to Hermione for help, but she shook her head, apparently as nonplussed as he was. What's the problem? Asked Harry. Problem? There's no problem, said Ron, still refusing to look at Harry. Not according to you, anyway. There were several plunks on the canvas above their heads. It started to rain. Well, you've obviously got a problem, said Harry. Spit it out, will you? Ron swung his long legs off the bed and sat up. He looked mean, unlike himself. All right, I'll spit it out. Don't expect me to skip up and down the tent because there's some other random thing we've got to find. Just add it to the list of stuff you don't know. I don't know, repeated Harry. I don't know. Plunk, plunk, plunk. The rain was falling harder and heavier. It pattered on a leaf-strewn bank all around them, and into the river chattering through the dark. Dread doused Harry's jubilation. Ron was saying exactly what he had suspected and feared him to be thinking. It's not like I'm having the time of my life here, said Ron. You know, with my arm mangled and nothing to eat, and freezing my backside off every night, I just hoped, after we'd been running around for weeks, we'd have achieved something. Ron, Hermione said, but in such a quiet voice that Ron could pretend not to have heard it over the loud tattoo. The rain was now beating onto the tent. I thought you knew what you signed up for, said Harry. Yeah, I thought I did too. So what part of it isn't living up to your expectations? Asked Harry. Anger was coming into his defence now. Did you think we'd be staying in 5-star hotels, finding a Horcrux every other night? Did you think you'd be back to Mummy by Christmas? We thought you knew what you were doing, shouted Ron, standing up, and his words pierced Harry like scalding knives. We thought Dumbledore had told you what to do. We thought you had a real plan. Ron, said Hermione, this time clearly audible over the rain thundering on the tent roof. But again, he ignored her. Well, sorry to let you down, said Harry, his voice quite calm, even though he felt hollow. Inadequate. I've been straight with you from the start. I've told you everything Dumbledore told me. And in case you hadn't noticed, we found one Horcrux. Yeah, and we're about as near getting rid of it as we are finding the rest of them. Nowhere effing near, in other words. Take off the locket, Ron, Hermione said, her voice unusually high. Please take it off. You wouldn't be talking like this if you hadn't been wearing it all day. Yeah, he would, said Harry. He did not want excuses made for Ron. Do you think I hadn't noticed the two of you whispering behind my back? Do you think I didn't guess you were thinking this stuff? Harry, we weren't... Don't lie, Ron hurled at her. You said it too. You said you were disappointed. You said you thought we'd have a bit more to go on then. I didn't say it like that. Harry, I didn't, she cried. The rain was pounding the tent. Tears were pouring down Hermione's face, and the excitement of a few minutes before had vanished as if it had never been. A short-lived firework that had flared and died, leaving everything dark, wet and cold. The sword of Gryffindor was hidden, they knew not where, and there were 3 teenagers in a tent whose only achievement was not, yet, to be dead. So why are you still here? Harry asked Ron. Search me, said Ron. Go home then, said Harry. Yeah, maybe I will, shouted Ron, and he took several steps towards Harry, who did not back away. Didn't you hear what they said about my sister? But you don't give a rat's fart, do you? It's only the Forbidden Forest. Harry, I face worse Potter, doesn't care what happens to her in here. Well, I do, all right? Giant spiders and mental stuff. I was only saying. She was with the others. They were with Hagrid. Yeah, I get it. You don't care. And what about the rest of my family? The Weasleys don't need another kid injured. Did you hear that? Yeah, not bothered what it meant though. Ron, said Hermione, forcing their way between them. I don't think it means anything new has happened. Anything we don't know about. Think, Ron. Bill's already scarred. Plenty of people must have seen that George has lost an ear by now, and you're supposed to be on your deathbed with Splattergroit. I'm sure that's all he meant. Oh, you're sure, are you? Right then. Well, I won't bother myself about them. It's all right for you two, isn't it? With your parents safely out of the way. My parents are dead, Harry bellowed. And mine could be going the same way, yelled Ron. Then go, roared Harry. Go back to them. Pretend you got over your Splattergroit, and Mummy will be able to feed you up and... Ron made a sudden movement. Harry reacted, but before either wand was clear of its owner's pocket, Hermione had raised her own. Protego, she cried, and an invisible shield expanded between her and Harry on the one side, and Ron on the other. All of them were forced backwards a few steps by the strength of the spell, and Harry and Ron glared at each other from either side of the transparent barrier, as though they were seeing each other clearly for the first time. Harry felt a corrosive hatred towards Ron. Something had broken between them. Leave the Horcrux, Harry said. Ron wrenched a chain from over his head and cast the locket into a nearby chair. He turned to Hermione. What are you doing? What do you mean? Are you staying or what? She looked anguished. Yes, I'm staying. Ron, we said we'd go with Harry. We said we'd help. I get it. You choose him. Ron, no, please. Come back. Come back. She was impeded by her own shield charm. By the time she had removed it, he had already stormed out into the night. Harry stood quite still and silent, listening to her sobbing and calling Ron's name amongst the trees. After a few minutes, she returned, her sopping hair plastered to her face. He's gone. Disapparated. She threw herself into a chair, curled up and started to cry. Harry felt dazed. He stooped, picked up the Horcrux and placed it around his own neck. He dragged blankets off of Ron's bunk and threw them over Hermione. Then he climbed onto his own bed and stared up at the dark canvas roof, listening to the pounding of the rain.